And to that piece of lieutenant that's always on his podcast, bash us, him.
Attention roll call.
That's right. Good morning, everybody. 8:05 live Eastern time. And of course, for me, 4:05 bright and early in the 49th state of Alaska. It's great to be back. I was out for a couple of days with a kidney stone, and I can tell you this. It is the most pain I ever had. I remember I called John. We spoke together on Thursday morning, and I thought I had food poisoning. I woke up. It was a normal day, and for 2 hours, I just had projectile vomiting and the worst pain in my back ever. And I was like, what is going on here? And I have a high threshold for pain. So I remember telling John, I was like, I think I got food poisoning. And for 2 hours, I was so exhausted, I passed out. Then I got up and I was feeling better. I guess it kind of subsided. I went to train jiu-jitsu and I started feeling like some discomfort and pain. I'm like, just power through it. Then I went out to dinner and it happened again. I had to leave the restaurant outside. It was embarrassing. I hid behind a tree and I was projectile vomiting and the worst pain. And my wife thought I had little bitch syndrome. She's like, just don't worry, have a cup of tea. And I'm like, I don't know. I know my body. I'm like, take me to the hospital. So I just went back home, took a shower, and I'm like, I was laying down and nothing's working. I'm like, take me to the hospital now. And so I can tell you this, my best advice is you are your own doctor. And sure enough, it was actually at this point, I was like praying to have something because I knew my wife would make fun of me. And sure enough, I had a stone and it hasn't passed yet. So maybe it's in my bladder, but I've been on enough pain meds to get through. So it's great to be back here. Thank you, friends and listeners. Some people wish me well, but I heard it's comparable and maybe worse than women giving birth. So I don't know. It took me to my hands and knees. So good morning. A lot of content with the NYPD. What's up, brother?
No, I'm not comparing nothing to get women giving birth. I don't ever want to feel that thing. Yeah, what's going down, fellas? Yeah, so Sal had a great interview yesterday. Glad you're back. He had Kelly Grace Price on. Crazy interview, man, because just her story alone, I just highlight so many problems within the NYPD. One around the hiring process. I still take a lot of issue with a lot of the points that were raised. Again, the systemic racist points that psychologists were basically denying Black and brown people jobs due to systemic racism. I think, if we went over a long period of time, I could get behind that argument. If you said disproportionately since the 80s, Black and brown people were disproportionately affected by these poor psychological examinations that unlicensed psychologists were giving, I would say, yeah, 100%. But when we're talking about 2015 on, to sit there and say that the job continues to be racist against Black and brown people when there has been a huge push to just hire Black and brown people, it's not a logical argument, in my opinion. My brain completely cuts off when I hear it because I'm like, it's just not the case. I think when we talk arbitrary and capricious, which she spoke about 100%, she highlighted that psychologists, that some of these psychologists said that their supervisors wanted different things, meaning that if you went for a psychological exam, one supervisor might approve you, and then for the same stuff, the next supervisor might deny you. What's that? Arbitrary and capricious. That's why I've been saying it through the mandate. The NYPD should change its motto to arbitrary and capricious. How they investigate, how they discipline, how they hire, how they transfer, how they, however, anything that they do, it's never in a competent form. It's always arbitrary. So, there was a lot of things around that. We titled this episode, How the NYPD Controls Public Perception. And I just want to highlight a couple of the issues that Grace went into in that interview with Sal, where, really she was met with bullying and huge resistance and threats of termination and threats of defamation from the NYPD. Again, this is supposed to be the most transparent NYPD in our history, and they're anything but that.
Yeah, good morning, guys. Good morning, chat. It's a nice, cool morning in New York right now. but we're pretty fired up right now from yesterday's burner of an interview with Kelly Grace Price. I think she kind of told us how the NYPD works by using their administrative route policies to kind of circumvent the law, and then if you don't like it, they intimidate you and try to get you fired, and it's when you consider what's happened in the last couple of years, especially during the scamdemic, when you that idea of using policy to circumvent the law, you go back and you look at the scamdemic, and that's exactly what they did back then. That's exactly what they did to Sal. That's exactly what they did to me and John and Eric. And it's their playbook for it. But yeah, I think we have a lot to say about this, and I'm pretty sure 1PP is watching today, and they'll probably be having another one of their meetings later on today, trying to scavenge around for some other gray area that they could use to apply to having broken the laws, So, but I think we're gonna have a great discussion today, and I'm glad to have Eric back, and it's great to have the band back together again.
I was fascinated with Grace's explanation. It was so articulate. I have to say, outstanding journalism, and the work that she put into this was unmatched. It was fantastic, and it was met with clear evidence. And what's interesting about that, it really solidifies when we talk on this podcast about, Marlon likes to coin it as perception management or perception control. It really solidifies that the arm of the NYPD, and we see it, right? We see it with different journalists, especially Bootlicker, is to give access to reporters that will be megaphones for the NYPD. And clearly, if there's a piece that's in opposition of NYPD rules and regulations, where she's talking about NYCRR, or some finding that puts the NYPD in a negative light, we don't get transparency. What we get from the NYPD is narrative control. This is a major problem. Obviously, this is something that's been going on for decades. We can't say this is new with this administration, but with this administration, we've seen the power dynamic, how it's gone so far to such a bullying tactic. We see the bullying tactic to particularly, and I think a lot of people forget, they don't want to mention it, first and foremost was this podcast. The bullying tactics by the NYPD. We've seen the bullying tactics towards reporters and journalists, right, like Harry Siegel. And then to hear Grace say it from the horse's mouth and talk about her journey in this case and how they bullied her as far as to try to get her terminated, it's almost like a Gestapo. So right away, my ears went up, thinking, wow, we just did a podcast where we did a watch party where Tim Pool had a podcast saying the NYPD are commies. And then you hear how the NYPD is putting such pressure on a freelance journalist for her piece. And you have to say to yourself, you know what? That kid is right. That kid is right. So you have to ask yourself right now, if you're an active member of the NYPD and you're part of general population and you're not part of that top tier, are you willing to allow this top tier to take you into a realm that you just don't agree with? Because a lot of people justify it to themselves. We've been saying, will your moral principles outweigh just immoral and things that go against the law and policy? And some people justify it because, well, I have to collect a paycheck. I have to support a family. And I get that. If you allow yourself to be in that position, we all can become victims of that. That's why you have to, I say, prior planning prevents piss poor performance, and plan your life out that you have a nest egg of funds so that these people can't cultivate you and captivate you. What do you think, John? Yeah, Mike, brother.
Oh, that's weird. What the hell happened to my mic? I don't know. I'm having issues. I'm obviously on the road, so I'm having issues. But whatever. All right. So there was a lot of things there yesterday, right? So first, Terrell Anderson. We said that it appears that Terrell Anderson is being scapegoated, right? He's the fall guy. They're going after Terrell Anderson. It doesn't make sense. The process was put in place. He used the process. Now, Grace made statements that he didn't do anything wrong and this wasn't favoritism. And I'm going to totally say that that's not accurate. I'm going to say there was 100% favoritism used and it was 100% arbitrary. And I want the demographics for who he overrode. I want to know, were they male blacks? And I guarantee the majority were male blacks and women, and very few male whites, if any, were overrode. And if they were, it was because they had the last name of someone who's up in the upper echelon of the NYPD or was. So I'm going to say that that's inaccurate statement, that Terrell Anderson didn't do anything wrong and that wasn't used for favoritism. I'm just totally saying, it's my opinion. That's how I feel. I think the numbers will be on my side. I'm willing to put money on it. So the other thing she said is that the NYPD wouldn't share demographics, meaning they wouldn't share the demographics of who had their cases either overrode or who was deemed psychologically not fit for the NYPD. Again, I'm going to say that's highly inaccurate. Why do we know that that's inaccurate? Myself and Eric did a podcast where we showed a podcast that former Deputy Commissioner of Equity Inclusion was on, Tanya Meisenholder, and she said that she knew that there was a problem with male blacks passing the psychological exam, so they wanted to remove those barriers. How would she know that if there was not demographics being calculated? It's impossible. And we know that the job, she even went as far as to say that not only does the job track the demographics of your gender and your race, but she also wanted to track who you slept with, meaning what is your sexual preference. Now, why the NYPD needs to know that, I don't know, but that's how much they track. So there was 100% demographics for whoever was overrode. But now, is Terrell Anderson the fall guy? 100% he is, right? I totally agree with that statement. The other part that he's innocent, this wasn't favoritism, I don't agree with it at all. And I'll take that to my grave. But was he the fall guy? Absolutely, he was the fall guy. And what did Gray say? Allegedly, Chief Benoit had to sign off on everything that Terrell Anderson did, right? So why is Terrell Anderson being held accountable? Why is the chief of personnel not being held accountable? And then we could say, there was the chief of personnel and he's so high up, he doesn't really see all the stuff that's happening. So maybe it's not on him. The same way like Jeffrey Madry could somehow run a police department, but not run his own office, so they try to alleviate any type of responsibility by layering themselves. I personally don't agree. I think it falls right on the heels of Chief Benoit. Sorry. I think if we were going to blame someone, we're going to blame him. But there's also another layer in between him where there's a review board. So if Terrell Anderson approves, and then it goes to a review board and they approve, and then it goes to the chief of personnel and they approve, how the hell does Terrell Anderson's name get smeared all over the papers? And now something else she alluded to was that that basically the job uses certain publications to push out puff pieces for them and also to do hit jobs, So I think it's a huge problem, not just for this issue. It relates to everything. It relates to crime reporting. It relates to corruption reporting. It relates to anything that has to do with the NYPD. They could manipulate the public's perception of it. Look what they did. They took Terrell Anderson and they hung him out to dry for him just following suit. They just threw him in front of the bus. They're like, oh, your turn, Terrell, and threw him right in front of the oncoming bus. Oh, not us. And now they're sitting there with their pants down and they don't know what to do. And so what I think is going to happen is you're going to see a lot of headpieces come out on a lot of people, including Grace, including this podcast, including Sal, and watch for that because that's coming.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Those hit pieces are coming, and that targeting is coming because they're in a tough spot right now. So going back to what John said, Tanya Meisenholder spoke about the psychological exams. So what does that tell us right now? That they where that first of all that they have that data that they refuse to give up about the psychological exams, and also that they were monitoring the entire process. Now, the problem with that is, as has been identified in that fantastic article by Kelly Grace Price, that the problem is that we have a set of psychologists who are part of the process, and yet they were unlicensed. And as Eric Sanders has pointed out, he's given a couple of reasons why that doing that was illegal, despite the NYPD referencing laws that don't apply to it. Now, I said this online that the NYPD is great at using, applying administrative policy to kind of circumvent the law, and they'll find gray areas in laws that really don't apply to it to use for their agenda. But the fact that she knew this also kind of makes me think that they knew the problems that existed with their psychologists, the fact that they were unlicensed, And I also asked this question yesterday. I posed this question to Grace, whether she believed that the reason why they did that was because these unlicensed psychologists were largely students and younger. And that means that they lacked a certain amount of life experience. And to a certain degree, they were malleable, again, because they probably have tons of debt from school. And when you have tons of debt from school, when you have tons of debt, period, you just want a job, because you got to keep the lights on. So to a certain degree, these young people were malleable. Okay. And I think, since we now know that Tanya Meisenholder knew about the process and they were paying attention to the process, that the fact that these psychologists were unlicensed was part of the agenda. It was a means for them to help to further expedite the agenda, which seemed to be happening there right now. And again, we can see a lot of it play out right now with the fact that the job is getting a lot of people who don't seem to really have their head in the game, or have that mentality that they're prepared for what they're going to face on the street. So
I think it's extremely important that we focus on Terrell Anderson, right? Because he's the scapegoat in this, as we said, and John was alluding to, right? So what is a scapegoat? In layman's terms, it's really important to understand a scapegoat is when there's a bigger problem and leadership finds an easy target to put the focus on and to put the blame. So you have to ask yourself why. And the reason why is because it goes back to, I think, again, I've said this on prior podcasts, and I think John Scola, when he sat down with Sal and spoke about how the problems with the NYPD are never corrected at the root causes, and they just continue to pay in litigation so that the leadership doesn't have to take any responsibility, I think he nailed it. And that's what this comes down to. Rather than the leadership saying, okay, clearly we made a mistake, we need to fix this now and take full responsibility, and we'll do a full investigation to right the wrongs. Instead, they completely deflect from it and find someone that could take the blame in hopes that this would just go away. And then let this problem fester for another 30 years, allegedly, and allow that to fester. Then, okay, the problem comes up again. We'll just be prepared for more litigation. So that's a problem, is that we're not getting to the root causes. So is Terrell Anderson just completely innocent from this? No, because there's a lot of questions to be had here. Now, the NYPD keeps data for everything, and I think that John and I really proved that with the watch party of Tanya Meisenholder, former deputy commissioner for equity inclusion, where she says they've analyzed that blacks are not getting the job because of the psychological process. So how would you know that unless you did a comparison? You actually had some form of metric measure. So there is data. There's no doubt about it. And clearly we're being gaslit here that there's no data for demographics. And even with that being said, we don't need the data. We have our own eyes. And that's what this perception management, this perception control is, to say, hey, what you're looking at is not really what you're seeing, right? You're seeing, rhetorically speaking, you're seeing 12 people shot at a lounge in Brooklyn, but crime is at an all-time low. So they're telling you something completely different from what your eyes are seeing. That is being gaslit. That's not transparency. And what we've learned with the NYPD, particularly also John and myself, in the Selective Affairs Bureau, also known as the Internal Affairs Bureau, with us being completely stonewalled in our investigation of the allegations we made, that the media is also used, again, to control the narrative, to try to push out information that would be in opposition to John and myself, which is the truth, to tell a lie. And this is what we see. It's just a cycle that goes on and again. And constantly what we hear is nothing's going to change. Well, if we don't keep our feet to the fire and keep being the squeaky wheel that gets the oil, then nothing will change. We have to continue. I think we're at the point that we could change the world. And it's podcasting. It's real people that are giving out truthful information. We're seeing real people put out real news in comparison to what goes on in mainstream media. And it's going to take some time. We're fighting a big animal here. And the NYPD has shown they have extreme amount of power to control the media. They give access to the media. And unfortunately, a lot of media personnel are timid for the fact that, well, if I don't play nice in the sandbox with the NYPD, I won't get vital information to actually report crime. That's another problem. They're supposed to have full access, but they're controlling the access. So we're seeing, are there commies? Are they commies? I have to say Tim Pool was right. Now let's look at Terrell Anderson for a moment. One thing we know about the NYPD is there is oversight over oversight. And if you're watching this right now, if you're active, retired NYPD, you completely understand that. If you're an outside law enforcement agency or you've been in the military, you understand that there's always oversight over oversight. And if you're in another organization, if you're a police enthusiast and you work in the corporate world or any organization that you work in, there's always oversight. So Terrell Anderson, does he have blame in this? Sure. We see the pictures out there. I had put out a solo video out on social media, and there's a picture that had surfaced in May of this year in the 7-3 precinct. I think it was approximately 55, maybe 56 newly graduated recruits that became police officers, and we only saw 3 white males in that picture. That's a problem. How can we say that there's not a lopsided issue with demographics when we see a picture like that? And I gave the data to show that in order to be a police officer, reside in New York City, which is boroughs, and outside counties, which are Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Orange. And the outside counties, it's 50% or more whites. So if we're actually doing an organic assessment, how do we come to that? So we have to constantly explore this and say that what Grace did is absolutely phenomenal. It's great journalism. And the pushback that she got, she showed extreme bravery, while other media personnel have gone along to get along.
So the other thing that is pretty alarming to me is, and it's something I knew, and I just don't think that the public knew. And I think Grace was like, for the first time you heard a reporter talking about what happens when they go to write a story. So she gets tipped off, obviously. People have their own. She basically said it. People within the NYPD tipped off, this is happening, this is wrong. She named some names of who did it. And so they tipped off these reporters, hey, you might want to start looking at this. So they basically shot this story around to the media. So when things are coming out from the NYPD, obviously there's somebody looking to get that out into the media. And then you always have to think to yourself, like, what's the agenda behind that? Is the agenda a righteous agenda? Is it a self-serving agenda? whatever it is, whatever the reason, there's an agenda and somebody tipped that to the media. And that's fair. So somebody said, this is wrong. This is, what's happening is wrong. We're destroying lives. We're destroying careers. And we're doing it with unlicensed people. And basically the NYPD is violating the law. So I have no problem with whistleblowers going to the media to do that. But so when Grace presents that she's going to write about this and ask questions of the NYPD, they don't respond. Right. So if you're a transparent organization, you're confident in what you do, or even if you got caught with your pants down, you would probably take some time to get your story together. But what they did was threaten her. They berated her. They bullied her. They bullied her editor. They told them they're not going to give them anything going forward. What does that mean? They're not going to tip the media off to any of the stories that they want out there. Any of the hot Terrell Anderson scoops, anybody they need to smear, anything they need there to run cover for either the mayor or themselves, whoever's in power. So they basically expose the whole game, the whole media game within New York City. It's controlled. It's a Mockingbird operation, right? You want the clicks? We'll give you the inside scoop. We'll give you our inside sources, but you're going to play ball with us. You're going to write the articles we tell you to write. So Grace tips her hand that she wants answers to these questions. And then she says that after she does that, a Post reporter starts calling all of her sources looking for a quote. So what does that mean? That means that the NYPD's DCPI told another reporter run cover. And another thing Grace alluded to is like that whole time, puff piece after puff piece was being put out by the Post to basically run cover for Grace's story, what was about to drop. So they needed to change the public perception prior to this bad news coming out, this bad story. So when I was listening to that, I was fascinated because I was like, that is the media. This is the first time I think that anyone's really getting a hand into how the media system and the ecosphere of media happens in New York City, especially when it relates to the NYPD or to politics. So it's everything's controlled, everything's perception, everything's a narrative, and you really have to take everything you read and watch with a grain of salt from everybody, including us, right? Because like I said, I watched that interview yesterday, and there was a matter of facts that was said that I didn't agree with at all. And I'm like, that's not the case. That's not true. So like everything you hear, you should be absorbing, thinking about, and thinking who has to gain what, and then do your own researches and come to your own conclusion. Because what we heard here is that the NYPD controls the media narrative. I mean, and me and Eric know that firsthand by what happened to us. And as well as I know that throughout the entire mandate, that the media is completely controlled and the NYPD controls it. I mean, look, I've said it before. Every time I go on any mainstream media, and I stopped doing it, and it's probably shame on me for doing it, but I enjoy doing this. I don't really enjoy doing 20-second clips on Newsmax or Fox. I don't think I think my takes are a little bit more nuanced than that. So I don't think I get to say what I need to say. And I don't really love the questions, but every time I do it, there just happens to be a very high ranking chief that calls up that station owner or that producer or that talent and says that I'm a racist. And why would you have me on? I'm a liar. I'm a racist. I'm a tinfoil hat wearing. And to me, it just shows the smear tactics that are used. And then it just relates to all those lawsuits that you hear that, hey, yeah, I was sexually abused. And then the minute I reported it, I was slandered and I had hit pieces written on me. And you're like, oh, that's how that happened. So, I think that was the greatest thing I heard yesterday was that Grace was really outlining the entire system and how stories are published and written and what happens. So, and then it got to the point where she had to fight with her editor and almost got fired over it to get her story out and her research. And really, at the end of the day, what she put out, she just put out some stuff. If it wasn't true, what she was putting out, why would you try to fire her or threaten defamation lawsuits? Why would you care? You wouldn't.
Yeah. So for all of you guys who are unaware what John is, when John mentions Mockingbird, Mockingbird relates to a government program in the early Cold War days. It started in the early Cold War days, but arguably never left. It just morphed into a different form, and that is that government sought to use the media for propaganda and as a mouthpiece of the state. And in a lot of ways, it never left, because we saw what happened during the scamdemic, when government was when the media parroted what government told them and didn't question any of it, and when media continued to repeat the big farmers lines about the let's say the disease. I'm trying to find the right word so that the YouTube's algorithms don't censor us, and that's the age we live in nowadays, apparently. So basically, that never left. Mockingbird never left. It's just in a different form. That form today exists with access to the media and with advertising when it comes to corporations. So if your media organization is getting a lot of money from say big pharma, you're pretty likely to kill stories that are very critical of big pharma, which is why you as viewers should always be critical and ask questions of what's happening. And that's why I think that the media landscape is now changing with the rise of the fifth estate, which is the citizen media and the citizen journalists. Yeah. I noted to the others in our conversation that I found out what happened on Sunday's mass shooting like hours after it did, long before the news media covered it, about the perp involved. And I found out because there's a guy who used to live in that area who has a YouTube, and he was talking about the gangs, and he noted the kid that started the shooting was also killed in the crossfire. So what's happening now is people don't trust the mainstream media, and they don't trust it because they see that Mockingbird never left. And I'm glad that people are at least starting to rise up and become the journalists themselves, or become the impetus for journalists to do their actual jobs. And in which case, I salute Kelly Grace, because she did a fantastic piece that that kind of it brings back faith in journalism. So and I hope that there are other journalists that also pick up on that and dig further into medical division and dig further into the NYPD and be critical of them, regardless of them coming at you with dystopian tactics and Stasi, Soviet tactics.
That's why earlier I said that I think that Grace showed some true bravery in this, right? Because she's a freelancer at this point, and she may have aspirations at some point to maybe get with one of these big papers, the Post, the Daily News. And that's why I say it's easy to just get along to go along, to be in that mix, right? That's the problem we see with the leadership of the NYPD and those that are rising through the ranks that justify stepping on other people's toes, that justify circumventing policy and law because, well, this is how I get to a point of self-promotion. And that's why I think Grace showed some extreme integrity, dedication, hard work, and motivation in her journalist experience in this venture, because she easily at some point could have backed away and said, okay, this is just too much pressure for my own career, even though she knew at this point, why they put up this wall, why they give me such opposition, why is it so polarizing to the point that they want to hurt me? What does the NYPD have to hide? And so what she did is bigger than herself, because this has affected lives of people that are in the NYPD, affected their careers, but this has also affected people that had aspirations, that wanted to be part of the NYPD or other law enforcement agencies, and this really just put a damper on the mindset of what they see in law enforcement. So there's a great comment here. Goes to Special Hagen Esquire. How you doing? there's a pattern like Epps. Anderson went from being celebrated with the NYPD, produced videos, to being torn down in the press. The question is why they turned against them at this point, right? All of a sudden. That's a great question. And I think that we laid it out here. The reason why is because the upper echelon has so much power that they will step on someone's toes and they'll find the scapegoat. And that's why I had put a video joking around saying, who's the dummy of the day? And I said it was Terrell Anderson. Now, I went to the academy with Terrell. He was always very congenial, never had a problem. I don't know him that well. I hear he was doing very well in his career. I know he moved up to the ranks, so I can't say anything bad about him. But what I can say, the reason why I said he's the dummy of the day is because it's obvious that he believed as he moved through the ranks that he would be protected and that, God forbid, something happens, that he would have an opportunity to explain why he utilized the access and authority to override who gets the opportunity to become a police officer, because he wasn't the final oversight. But it shows exactly what we've been saying. This upper echelon will find a scapegoat, not to correct the root cause, but to deflect from what's really going on, to take care of litigation. Terrell Anderson will be the person on his own island to fight this, and they will just bury him. They always find someone to bury. John, what do we always say? They find casualties. Terrell Anderson was a casualty. Does that mean Terrell Anderson is free from blame? No, I think it's obvious when I talk about that picture of the 7-3 precinct. It's not just a 7-3 precinct. If you're an active police officer right now, if you're retired, you have connections to the NYPD, go through some of these social media pages. If you're just a police enthusiast, go through some of these social media pages of different precincts throughout New York City and look at the pictures. I'm not saying it as a thing to be racist at all. I could care less what the people look like. And even more, unlike Tanya Meisenholder, I could care less who they sleep with. I care how they do the job. But it's important to make an actual analysis and a comparison to see something's wrong here. How could in a city of 5 boroughs where approximately 30% makeup, the demographics are white, and the outside counties where you have to reside are 50% or more, Putnam County is as high as 77% white, and yet we look at a picture, and it solidifies and validates what I've been saying, that if you're an alpha white male or an alpha white female, you're not getting the job. And clearly, I look at these pictures and say, well, they didn't get the job. And it goes back to what we've been saying in this podcast. And I thought it was quite interesting what Grace laid out. If you have an opportunity to, and if you have not watched, it was an awesome show, by the way. She did an amazing job on Sal's show. And she said to Sal, I thought it was interesting, they are doctors. You know, we're not saying they're not doctors, but it has to be very specific that they have to be psychologists and certain qualifications, certain criteria. And that's important. We're making a determination if someone is qualified to get a job to be a New York City police officer. And what John said earlier is absolutely right. It's arbitrary and capricious, because if we took an analysis of someone that did have the opportunity, was hired, in comparison to someone else that wasn't, we may find that similar attributes and traits and characteristics got someone the job, and for someone else, it got them disqualified, because we're using people that do not have the qualifications. So we don't have an actual criteria, which is quite interesting. Usually the NYPD would have a template for everything, but yet we don't have a template for this. And I used to say it all the time. John, Marlon, you know this. If you ask a question to a sergeant in the NYPD, if you ask a sergeant in another precinct, you'll get 2 different answers. That's always been a problem. But with this, even more so, there should have been definitive criteria on the determination of someone who becomes a police officer, especially someone that's an actual police officer who's been involved in a trauma incident, how these things are handled. This is irresponsible, and it clearly is a violation of policy and law, and yet we'll just continue to fight more litigation and not get to the root cause. What, in the end, what is more costly? Is it more costly to hire licensed professionals that fit this criteria, or to just pay potential litigation? And to me, the answer is, why don't we get to the root cause, peel back these layers, and hire those that are qualified, really strip down the candidate assessment division, and make sure that it's a well-oiled machine.
You would need competent people in leadership to be able to see that and say, oh, yeah, we could just hire licensed people like we were told to in 2023, and we still continued to hire people that weren't, so, that's the root of the problem. But when, Special Hagen, that was a great question. Like, why Terrell Anderson? So it's alleged, I'm not sure, I didn't look into it, but I believe it to be true. It's alleged that Terrell Anderson was the commanding officer when Jeff Madry, voided the arrest of a former NYPD officer. Terrell Anderson was the CO of that command, and he notified IAB. So that's why. It wasn't because he was just a cog in the wheel, right? He was just following the system, right? It was him. It was his approval. Then it was the council's approval. Then it was the chief of personnel's approval. But Terrell Anderson got singled out in the middle, in mid-level management. He gets singled out, and they're like, "Oh, it's him. It's him. He hit the button. He's got to go." Right? And it's like, "Oh, why? Oh, because somebody's got a bone to pick with him for going after his boy." Right? And that's what is being alleged is that, and I wonder who would be trying to go after Terrell Anderson for Jeff Madry, because Jeff Madry's gone. Oh, I don't know. Maybe the person that said Jeff Madry's their mentor. Maybe the person that wore white gloves and drove Jeff Madry around while he was meeting people and doing everything else but police work. Maybe the people that were covering for Jeff Madry while he was studying for the bar exam. I don't know. Maybe, right? So why Terrell Anderson? That's why. That's why. So that's everything it has to do. Yeah, and 100% shout out to Grace, because I think it was brave of her. She had more balls than a lot of you guys. I gotta say that right now. She's got a ton of balls. Like, she was like, I don't care, fire me. I don't care. I'll never work for you again. If this story doesn't come out, I'm not working here no more. So shout out to her. I thought, like, again, was everything that was said, do I agree with? No, but I agree with the majority of it. And the main thing that I agree with is, if you were hired and if you were psychologically psyched off the job, or you were deemed not psychologically fit by the NYPD from 2015 to current day, I would contact Eric Sanders. That's the main thing I agree with. I agree with that the NYPD broke the law. They continue to break the law. They got caught with their pants down. They tried the bully tactic to get off of it. They're continuing to run puff stories in the media for Adams and this administration, and covering up all the corruption that happened. And I think that you were harmed. You were harmed in your career. Your character was smeared, and it was unwrongfully smeared. It was wrongfully smeared because you didn't get a fair process. And again, it's bigger than a psychological exam. I still, till this day, I argue with everyone over the vaccine mandate, because they want to tell me how safe and effective it was, which is honestly is laughable to me at this point. But you want to talk to me about the efficacy? I'm like, I'm not talking to you about the efficacy. I'm talking to you about civil rights were violated, and I'm talking to you that this is a due process problem. We have a cop down below right here, Marlon Bethel, detective, did absolutely nothing wrong and was terminated within 7 days for what they say is an administrative failure. But we know in the police department that if there was an administrative failure, he's due a trial. He's due process. He could fight himself. He could fight his argument before he's terminated. And that didn't happen. It's a due process problem. And here is the same exact thing. You went and you applied for a job, or maybe you were part of the job, and then someone told you arbitrarily, you're going to go for a psych exam because I don't like you, John. You asked too many good questions that I don't have the answers to. And now you went and sat down with a psychologist who actually wasn't even licensed and sit down to be in an arbitrary interview where someone could just deem or undeem you. And like Grace said, they used certain people to get the outcomes that they wanted, whether it was positive or negative. Oh, you go here, they'll pass you. You go here, they'll fail him. You know what I mean? Like, so what happens is we just see a completely incompetent system here. And there's a huge due process problem. You were not given proper due process. Contact Eric Sanders.
Yeah, just to go back on Eric's question, I'm going to say, Eric, that it's actually, if you're looking at it from their perspective, it's actually cheaper for them to litigate it. They'd rather litigate it than to actually fix the problem. And the reason why they would do that is because the problem is part of the agenda, and nothing trumps the agenda, you know? And we got to look at what the agenda is. We're talking the 30 for 30 agenda, which again seeks to artificially, you know, to artificially boost the numbers of women on the police force, and to artificially diversify the job. And again, nothing trumps the agenda, because in a lot of ways the agenda is kind of like the agenda is tied. What we know, the agenda is tied to progressivism. Okay. And in a lot of ways, that progressivism is like a religion to them. Okay. So nothing trumps the agenda. But I want to also point out, and before I go on, and again, progressivism, if you look at the people who were at the top, who are in the units that make long-term strategic policy in the department, and look at long-term manpower needs of the department in strategic initiative, well, guess what? They're progressives, you know? They're academics, progressive. This is their life for them, okay? And I also want to point out the in terms of agenda, again, what have we seen through Eric Adams' tenure? We've seen the obsession with drones and AI and automation, and that is part of the agenda too. Because again, Tanya Meisenholder was part of the NYC Automated Decisions Task Force, which was tasked with trying to put a lot of systems into AI algorithms, how to begin the process of doing that. So it's all part of the same process. And as I've said before, what happened to all of us is all related. They don't want masculinity on the job. They don't want independent thinking. They don't want people to make decisions anymore on their own. They don't want that. They don't want you making decisions on your own, because they want the algorithm to be doing that. Everything is going to be centralized from the top using AI and all these technocratic tools, and they want to diversify the job, and that's part of making the job cheaper. Okay, because if you get qualified people, the qualified people are going to go where they're treated best and probably paid the best too. So you're going to get people in NYPD who probably wouldn't get in the door in a lot of departments, but they're all too happy to get in the door here and work for $2 an hour, you know, so to speak. So I think it's all related. And what happened to Sal was I said before that they wanted to what happened to Sal happened around the election time, and they wanted to dissuade masculine men on the job from standing up to what's happening, and from standing up to the draconian measures that were going on in the job. They wanted to punish that sort of thinking, you know. So I think everything is related, and it's related to the agenda, and nothing trumps the agenda. And to them, they'd rather fight it they'd rather litigate it than solve the problem, because if they solve the problem, they miss out on the potential of billions of dollars that they're going to save by getting a cheaper workforce and by automating everything.
I think you nailed it. There's no doubt about it, right? So it's amazing how things are starting to come full circle, and I never thought that the answer would be validated in retirement. And it started with, I say this all the time, I say this on numerous podcasts, I said on X basis, or just a normal conversation. Around the time of 2018, it was posed to me numerous times, and I remember being at the precinct, working in PSA 7, seeing new recruits come in, graduates, police officers. And the cop said to me, "Wow, boss, they hire just anyone." And I remember saying, "No, they're looking for a specific type, meek, timid, and docile." And I received a lot of opposition, particularly from friends also in the candidate assessment division, said they do everything they can to make sure that people are properly vetted and it's organic, and people that deserve the job get the job. And I said to myself, well, how do they do this? How do they actually hire meek, timid, and docile? How do we hire people, and how do we disqualify alpha white males, alpha white females? How is it done? And that's where I think you've absolutely nailed it, Marlon. The cost is not a factor in this. I would think that it's cheaper to hire qualified professionals, but you're right. That would actually negate the ability to actually continue this agenda. And what is that agenda? The agenda is to cultivate DEI in the NYPD. The other factor that is part of this conversation is Tanya Meisenholder, former deputy commissioner for equity and inclusion, where John and I did the watch party, where she said they're actually monitoring how do we get people in that have a various multitude, a diverse sexual orientation, diverse gender, diversity when it comes to more black and brown, and diversity, especially when we talk about genders, that 30 for 30 definitive effort of getting women by 2030. And I, I said to myself, well, how are they doing this? And this is exactly it. We've actually come to that pinnacle point where now we're pivoting, and we see how this all works. And if we hadn't licensed psychologists, that would completely deviate from this agenda. So this allows room for error. And it doesn't give the power to the psychologists. It gives the power, which is why this was all put in place, I believe. It gives the power to the NYPD to actually tip those scales. That's what Tanya Meisenholder, basically, my assessment, John, I think you agree, is it allows the NYPD to tip those scales and to push a DEI agenda by having the authority and access to who gets the job or who doesn't get the job. I just think that the NYPD has so much power that they have experienced always winning. The NYPD is always winning. And I'm sure they felt they would continue to win and win this battle. They'll find the scapegoat. That's what they do. That's what they do. Daniel Pantaleo, they found him. Terrell Anderson, they find their scapegoats who take the blame and just completely deviate. This gets shoveled under the rug, and they're on to the next thing. But I think now with podcasts, and now with this network of journalists and freelancers coordinating and collaborating together, we've become a force and holding the NYPD and other law enforcement agencies accountable. And I think this really is that pinnacle moment. So if you've asked yourself, because I've asked myself, how did the NYPD pull this off? How do I see a picture in the 7-3 precinct with only 3 white males in 2025 when the demographics completely don't match? And it shouldn't matter. It doesn't matter. But the point is, since we're having this conversation, how do we get to that point if it is organic and and we're finding the most suitable cops? It's just virtually impossible. Unless was the NBA. We're hiring a specific type of person who's a great athlete, but we're not. We're hiring people that love New York City, that want to be cops. And who becomes a cop? Ordinary good men and women. And obviously, we're not hiring ordinary good men and women. We're hiring a specific type. So, John, before I pass to you, just want to thank George Misford with G2 Training. Outstanding job that he does. $19.99 coffee and donuts to the podcast. Thank you always so much. We appreciate it. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, check out the key, guys, if you're looking to get promoted on the NYPD. I mean, that's what me and Eric use to pass the sergeant's and lieutenant's exam, captain's exam. So if you want to get promoted in the NYPD, go to the key, take all the classes, follow that guide, and study on your ass off on your own as well. So, that's how you become sergeant and lieutenant and a captain in this job. It's not hard. You just got to put the work in. Right? It's just like working out. You want muscles, work out. You want to be a sergeant, study. So that check out the key. So yeah, thanks, George. We appreciate it. So I think a couple of things. I'm gonna run in about a half hour. I got a hard out today. But a couple of things. Like one, I think that this system was always in place, and I think the job did it to keep control over who they hire. Now it just happens to be that they want to hire women, and they want to hire black and brown males. Like it just happens to be that. At a time, I would say that was the opposite, that they used this system to deny black and brown people and to deny females. You know what I mean? I just think it's just this system that's always been in play. And a lot of these pictures, a lot of people are getting crazy with the and they're not getting crazy with it because it's accurate. It's like, how are you saying that, when we look at Pat Gordon or I look at anyone else out there saying that the job's systemically racist against blacks? I'm like, how are you saying that? Look at the picture of the 7-3. Look at the picture of the 8-1. Like, there's no white guys there. I mean, at all, and I say, but bigger than even that, there's no men there. They're all women. They're all women. I mean, and then when you look and you go back to the 30 for 30 movement, I mean, I think the department will far surpass that by 2030, 30% women by 2030. And like Marlon said, it's artificial. It's not organic. It's not an organic play on what the makeup of the city is. And so I think it's always been there, and it's been there to excise and gain control over whatever they want. Whatever they deem fit. You want some young kids from New York City that are fit? All right, yeah, we'll get those kids in. We'll qualify them. We'll overlook certain things. Oh, we don't want those kids anymore? Nah, you got a red cup summons? Nah, you're out. You're not coming in. I know a lot of people, and Eric does too. We know a lot of people where their sons were disqualified on psych evaluations to become members of the NYPD. These are kids that come from good families. They come from police backgrounds. They're in shape. They were good in school, never got in trouble. And guess what? They weren't qualified to be, and they weren't psychologically fit to be NYPD cops. Yet they've went on to have successful careers in other law enforcement agencies without an issue. And you're like, wait, how did that happen? And when I talk to anybody about the process, there's like, oh, there's things about them you don't know. I'm like, yeah, I'm not buying that. I'm like, so people I know, you can't tell me that about. People I don't know, maybe. People I know, I just an acquaintance with, yeah, there's things about all of us we don't know about each other, right? But like people that you're close with, people's kids, like, I'm sorry, people, they know their kids. You know what I mean? Like, like you're the expert on your kid. Like, what's up with your kid. You might be blind to some of the stuff, but I mean, when they go on to have a successful career in another law enforcement agency for over a decade, that fails on its face. And then there's kids that are on the job that I know that failed the psych and they sued and they won and they got the job. And again, that's like a smear on them for their life. And it's arbitrary. It's wrong. And I think, I just think what we see is the organization. It just sway. It's like Eric Adams, right? Like, who is Eric Adams politically? When people argue Eric Adams politics with me, I'm like, I just laugh because I'm like, next week he'll change whatever he says. Tomorrow, he might even change in the press conference, depending on the question he gets. He blows with the wind. But he ultimately wants to control everything. He wants to stay in power. And that's the NYPD. They blow with the wind. And they just ultimately want to control everything, the narrative, everything. They shut you out. And I think it's wrong. And honestly, that they're going to, unfortunately, the taxpayer is going to pay a lot of money for this, a lot of money for what they did. Just real quick, I want to get on before we get out of here. I want to get on what came out in that AM article. I know you guys are going to probably stay, but I'm going to run. I definitely want to hit on that AM article. I don't really have anything further on this other than that. Like, they control the narrative, and what they're doing is completely wrong. Marlon, you got anything on this?
No. I think we've said everything. But you said you believe that process existed before, and I'm gonna say I agree too. And I also believe that this process of putting pressure on the media to write stories that are in the job's favor, that aren't critical of the job has been in place for a while too, because the fact that they just went back to business as usual, even with reporters, digging around for this story, after giving a kind of flippant response to the questions that were posed of them, is your indication that they this is what they've done before, and they figured, no one's gonna continue. This is they're not gonna want to be denied access from 1PP. So, but I think we've covered it.
Marlon, just to solidify that point, that I often get leaked to me information from a reporter, from another reporter, and I'm like, wait, I'm sorry, why are you telling me this? Oh, they're afraid to talk to you. I'm like, why are they afraid to talk to me? I'm like, have I ever said one thing where I got any piece of info from? They're like, listen, they're worried that all of their sources inside the NYPD will stop talking to them if they know that they talk to you. So basically saying that DCPI feeds them this garbage that they put out to get the clicks. And if they find out that they're talking to me, they're cut off. You know what I mean? And I thought that was hysterical. So that just solidifies exactly that whole thing that you just said right there.
Right. That's why I made that point earlier, that I think Grace showed extreme bravery because she put aside her own self opportunities. We talk about self-image, self-promotion for the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that there are people that have been affected by this in their careers, and there are people that have been affected by this in their lives, whether they got the opportunity to get the job or not, or their lives have been altered while working for the NYPD because they may have dealt with someone that was unqualified according to the criteria that needs to be met to be a licensed psychologist with these specific parameters for the NYPD. I think she showed extreme courage and bravery because what we have seen from journalists throughout New York City is that desire to have access. And that's what the NYPD utilizes. That's their leverage. The leverage is access, right? If you want access to the information, access to what's going on with crime, to the hot stories in the NYPD, well, then you need to go along to get along. You need to play nice in the sandbox with the NYPD, which further solidifies where we would see someone like Tariq Shepard have the audacity to actually tell a reporter, to go F themselves, right? Because the NYPD has had so much power and authority. That's why some of the issues that are going on with this administration, we're not fools to say, wow, this administration just came up with some of these ideas, and this is just a complete rogue administration in dichotomy with the way the NYPD has run for years. We realize that a lot of these things are problems that have been going on for years. It's just with this administration, it is just far beyond our expectations on what we see as misconduct, potential corruption, because this administration has taken it to a different level. And it's also timing. It's timing in this post-life of pandemic, where what Marlon said earlier is absolutely right. We can no longer trust the mainstream media. I say it all the time. The mainstream media has become almost like a religion. If you believe in certain politics, you watch leftist media. If you believe in certain politics, you watch the right side of media. And we can't say who's exactly right, who's telling the truth. And I think at this point, it's podcasters that are telling the truth. John, myself, Marlon, Sal, we tell you constantly, the entire Finance Unfiltered family, this is our opinion based on anecdotal experience. It's also our opinion based on fact analysis. But you are entitled to your opinion also. This is our truth, and we're giving you our truth, and we want to hear your truth also. And the mainstream media, in many cases, is trying to gaslight you and put the public in vulnerable positions. And that's what we learned from the pandemic. So, Marlon, I agree. I think this is something that was going on for years. Do I think black and brown people were discriminated against and not getting the job because of these parameters? Yes, but I don't believe it's now. I believe at some point, yes. We talked about the 80s, maybe the early 90s, but right now, clearly, it's alpha white males and alpha white females that are straight that are being demonized, and they're the ones that are being discriminated against. And how do we know that? It's based on observations. We see the pictures. We see the cops that are getting on the job. We see cops that are involved in encounters on the street and what they look like. And is it important what they look like? Not necessarily, but it goes to this problem, and it's deeper. It's not just what's on the surface. The deeper problem is that lives have been changed and careers have been altered to permeate this DEI agenda. And no matter what gets in its way, they'll step all over it. So I think we really nailed it right here. I think, again, goes back to what we've been saying. You should challenge what we say and say, you know what, I agree with that, or I don't agree with that. That's what a podcast is. It's a discussion. It's a free speech platform for everyone. And we're not going to try to push a narrative. That's why it's unfiltered.
Yeah. So and then just moving on from that, like I've been saying for a while that Eric Adams is the king of the defund the police movement. And it sickens my stomach when I watch podcasters or I watch talking heads, and they just attribute defund the police movement with Zohran Mamdani. I'm like, Eric Adams is the king of the defund the police movement. He literally, I showed you the proof over and over again of him saying he wanted to lower the overall headcount of the NYPD, which is much worse than defund the police. Defund the police was just moving anywhere from $600 million to $1 billion, which he wanted to do to give to dyslexia screening, right? That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to defund the police, but he went a step further than anyone else. And he said he wanted to lower the headcount of the NYPD. And how he was going to do that is through attrition. He weaponized the vaccine mandate, and then he made the job so miserable that people were fleeing in droves. So this article, which comes out of AM New York, which is known for their puff pieces about the Adams administration and the NYPD, I don't think they've ever written a critical article ever. So, this reporter is going to get in big trouble for writing this article because he unleashed Dean Moses. He unleashed something in here that it also solidifies another thing that I've been saying, that this administration continuously pushbacks on with fake handles and zero proof. I've been saying for the last year that more cops under Eric Adams, more NYPD cops have retired early, or resigned under this administration than at any other point in New York City history. Fake handle after fake handle, who I believe is linked to the highest uniform member of the service in the NYPD, came on and continuously fought back with that without ever providing the proof of it, saying that's not an accurate statement. That's not an accurate statement. But when you read this article, the thing that stands out in this article, bigger than the NYPD losing an average of 300 cops a month, because it's actually more than that they lose. Bigger than that is the fact that 14,500 cops have left the NYPD in the last 4.5 years. Eric Adams was the mayor for over 3.5 of those years. And you're sitting there and telling me there's not a problem in the NYPD? You're sitting there and telling me that this is a sustainable loss? It's impossible. What they didn't write in there is how many cops have replaced those 14,500 people. Because if they did that, what would happen? You would know that there's not 34,000 plus members of the NYPD. And just real quick before I get off, it's so bad that there are no sector cars. Basically, if you have 3 cars you're turning out in the busiest precincts in New York City, you're fully stacked, which is disgraceful. It's a danger not only to the cops, but to the residents of each precinct. So they're severely understaffed. They're lying, saying there's 34,000 cops, when in fact there is not. And the other day, there was a face-to-face relief post. I won't say where. And the cop was so afraid of getting in trouble that he kept calling to use the bathroom because his post, it was mandatory that someone needed to be there, and nobody could come to relieve him because it was so short-staffed that he defecated himself on his post. Now, do I blame him for just saying, you know what am I going to do? I gotta go to the bathroom. I have to do it. It depends the post. It depends the severity of the post, right? What if this is, we are the #1 terrorist target in the world? Depends the severity of the post. But this officer defecated himself rather than leave his post. That's what's happening in the NYPD. So when they're like, oh, why are the cops leaving? Oh, it's easy. It's a completely abusive relationship. And after a while, after so many beatings, at some point, the abused says, I can't do this anymore. I got to move on. I just can't continue to get battered, and it's hard, because we see traditionally with abusive relationships, the people that are abused don't want to leave their abuser, right? They don't think there's anything else out there. Oh, no one will love me. No one will be this good to me. And that's what's happening in the NYPD. It's a completely abusive relationship. And Eric Adams, I lay the blame at him solely. This exodus could have been stopped. immediately if we had a person in office who actually cared and was actually cared about humans and cared about the NYPD. This was his revenge tour. This is his legacy, regardless of what the New York Post or Fox News or even Donald Trump tells you. This is his legacy. More than half of the police officers in the NYPD have left under him. And you're telling me there's not a problem? And you're telling me this guy's going to save New York City? Disgraceful.
Yeah, it absolutely is. You know, it's pretty incredible losing 14,000 MOS. I mean, if you think about it, like Chicago police, they have 12K cops, right? LAPD has 8K cops, and I think their manpower usually hovers around 10K. But just in those span of years, we've lost more cops than are actually on the force in the next most populated cities in the country, and that's pretty incredible. That you know what's going on. It's you know, the officer in the article, his experience mirrors mine because he was in a specialized unit, and yet the job kept using him for a foot post. You know, they kept putting him out there every day on a foot post, and when he was in a specialized unit, that you know they have their own you know their own say investigative priorities that aren't, you know, they become second fiddle to the shortage of manpower now. So I think I 100% agree with John that Eric Adams is the defund the police mayor, and it again goes back to the agenda. And for Eric Adams, for the people at Strategic Initiatives, and for DCAS, the agenda is almost like a religion, because they're all dyed in the wool progressives. Okay, but for Eric Adams, the agenda is for him to get reelected, and the agenda is what his backers want. And there's no way that Eric Adams was going to deviate from the agenda. And again, what have we seen right now? Well, we've seen the same tech and crypto bros are now launching AI bots to try and downvote our comments and try to, like, you know, try to bring phony facts or basically it's a real-time perception management campaign going on because of those bots. But it's because, again, Eric Adams is the point man for getting their agenda into the city, and all this money, they have this massive vested interest in it happening. So it's a terrible situation that what's happening with the job, and I think the problem is so big that I at this point I can't see how it's going to be solved within a year or two. We're now kind of like in a decades-long hole, because for one thing, if you replace 300 MOS that are leaving this month, that's decades of experience that's walking out the door. Okay, and it doesn't matter if you got 1,000 rookies in the door; those rookies don't know what they're doing, and they won't have experience at the precinct to even help them in learning to become a good cop. So this is a problem that's going to take. This might take decades to correct at this point.
John, I know you got to do a hard out, so I want to say thank you as always, brother. But before you go, why don't you close with this question here? I think it's a good question for you to go on with your day, and maybe it's something to think about. John, it comes to GI Bro. John, if you stayed on, would you have taken the captain's test? Good way to close out, brother.
If I would have stayed on, I would have been a forever captain. I would already be a captain, 100%. Yeah, 100%. I would have been a captain. Yeah, I wanted to move up. I thought that I could affect change in a precinct. I thought that I would be able to lead, unlike what I was seeing. I would have followed the people that I believe were leaders in the job. I would have followed their path, and I would have went and did the things that I thought that the people that were terrible leaders, I would have did the exact opposite of them. You know, I would have followed the path. So I really believed in the mission of the NYPD. I love New York City. I love its residents. And I thought I could affect change in the small environment. And I think the best way to test that out is to be a captain and be a commanding officer, and then push back and lead from behind, right? Push back at the administration too, as well. So yeah, 100%. So everybody, thank you. I appreciate it, guys. Have a great show. But like I said, if you failed that psych exam, call Eric Sanders, because I think that it was I think it's completely wrong. And I think that if you were smeared that you had psychological issues and you didn't even get a proper psychological evaluation, that's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. It's like telling someone they have no religion by having a 6-month rookie say, yeah, you have no faith, you don't believe in God. So it's just as disgusting. And just on the attrition of this, like the defund through attrition. I mean, when are you people going to wake up? Seriously, when are you going to wake up? I mean, 14,500 cops are gone. We're hiring people that have no business in policing. And what's the effects of that in your quality of life and in your city? Crime's going to rise. When you call 911, people are going to show up and you're going to be like, yeah, I'm never calling them again. And then what? You know what you're going to be doing? You're going to be begging, please, Donald Trump, have a federal takeover of my city. Please govern me harder, daddy. You're just going to be calling for the people that put you in the situation to save you. So wake up, people. Check it out. Find us Unfiltered. I'll be back at you. Eric, Marlon, have a great show, guys. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, brother.
All right.
Be good.
You,
yeah. So John's at it. He's in New York. He's playing whack-a-mole. So we're going to get into this segment. But before we do, I just want to, correspond what you said. But even before that, I want to say that I think John would have been an outstanding captain. And I think that we're making more impact now. It's funny how life works out. We never thought we'd be at this point. I was on the list. I actually did well. Got passed over for about 2 years because of the target I had on my back from the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And John talks about change. And I made my life's passion was leadership. I was on a graduate officer candidate school in the Marines, wanted to be a leader. And I loved being a leader amongst men and women within the NYPD. My way of looking at change was, how do I turn boys into men? How do I turn girls into women? That was one thing that was so important to me, is I wanted to pass the torch. I wanted to give all the knowledge I could to young men and women that worked with special operations, whether it was anti-crime or when I was a special operations lieutenant, and watch what they did at work, transition to doing their job better, but transition to make them better husbands, better wives, better people in their lives because of the confidence that they, I always wanted to build people's confidence. And I was always a firm believer, how do you build their confidence? You build their confidence. So we constantly read case law. We constantly did trainings together of how to control subjects or persons of interest with the minimal, with the minimal amount of force, right? How do you control someone where you have control and leverage over them, but you're not having to cause damage? And that was my way of leading, is turning boys into men and girls into women and better people on the job and off the job, and so that they have better family lives. And I think, I always said I really want to make captain and move above that and be a leader, within the police department. Obviously, I never got that opportunity. There was no due process with the Civilian Complaint Review Board. But I think here we've built something together. We built a network. I want to thank the friends and listeners, which is so important. Our audience is so captivating and engage with us and help us build this support system together, right? We're supporting law enforcement. We're combating legislation that is anti-law enforcement and polarizing. So, excuse me, everything in life happens for a reason, happens with a purpose. And you have to put pain to purpose or significance to purpose. And we're doing it here with this podcast. And that's what I think we're doing, Marlon. So I want to pull up this article again. I want to get back to that. I think we should continue on this and talk about the aspects of why are we losing 300 cops per month. And I think what's so important is not just the number. It's what you said, Marlon, which I think is something that we should talk about, is what we're not getting is passing the torch. And that is what's so important, that as we lose cops, that the cops that are getting more time on the job, are the best and the most qualified, that they have the experience doing the job, right? It's important that not only do we fill these seats with new cops, because I think it's about 50 or 60%. Don't quote me here. Approximately, I have to get the numbers, but I think it's around 50% plus or minus that have less than 5 years on the job. So we're not passing that torch. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic and what happened in COVID, we lost that ability for veteran cops to pass the torch to new cops, for them to move up, and then to pass the torch on to new cops. And what we have is just the blind lead the blind with all these new cops, and cops that not necessarily have the characteristics and attributes to be a police officer. Does that mean you have to have the skills to be a young police officer? No, but you need to have the potential. You need to have the desire to want to help people. You need the desire to have the ability to be a warrior, and also to have garrison and carry both hatchets. So, Marlon, I think you're spot on, right? You nailed it. We're not when it comes to cops, it can't just be a number for number. It can't be, well, we lost 5 and we'll replace them with 5. What 5 are we replacing with? Meek, timid, and docile? Those 5 police officers that left, what were their attributes? Did they pass the torch? Did they teach the new guys? And unfortunately, it was so abrupt because of the vaccine mandate. We lost that. So we have a major gap. We have people that have less than 5 years on the job. And the only mayor they ever worked for was Eric Adams. And then we have some people on the job that are about to retire, and they've seen that transition over time, and no longer do they want to be there, right? For the new guys, they can't miss something they never had. But for those that are about to retire, they have one foot out the door, and they're saying to themselves, well, I worked under Bloomberg, and I worked under de Blasio, and I worked under Eric Adams, and I don't like the path and the way the police department has changed. Why would I continue to be here? And they can't even pass the torch, because if they do pass the torch, and that's intrusive police work, the new police officers would find themselves outpacing me, and they would become the most complaint cop. What are your thoughts, Marlon?
Yeah, I think you need years to become to fully understand how to become a cop, especially in the NYPD, where training is lackluster in the academy. Now I was a cadet, so I kind of knew how the job worked before I got on. But even then, as a rookie cop, you're presented with there's minutia that you're presented with that they don't talk about in the academy. I mean, for one thing, you're not they don't tell you about the burdensome paperwork that you're gonna have to do, and that how you're gonna have to articulate your stops. And the academy in the NYPD doesn't prepare you well for the actual reality of the streets. And this is a problem, because now you don't have the senior cops in the precinct to fill in those blanks that the academy doesn't teach you. So again, I believe it takes years for you to fully become a good cop. And I don't care if you're the kind of cop who got out the academy and had like 50 collars in your first year. Okay, I don't care, because you still there's a lot. You may have arrested 50 people, but do you really know how to actually articulate your stopping, to cite the law and the reasons why you stopped that person, and to fully articulate it to DAs that are looking to get you more so than they are looking to prosecute the perp, and they're looking for ways to decline your case. Okay, so I don't think so. And I think that's why we see a lot of young guys in particular. Like, you look at a lot of the CRT guys, the khaki pants guys, and a lot of them they're in the no testify list for the DA. That's because a lot of them are young, and they that skill to articulate your stops. If you don't know how to do it right, you may very well come across as or you may make a mistake and be put on that DA no testify list. So this is something that takes years to fully articulate, to fully become a well-rounded cop, and the job is doing a great disservice by letting all that experience walk out the door. But as we've seen with like the union bosses and the job itself, their answer to that is, oh, we'll give you a little more money, and that'll make you want to stay. We'll give the new guys a little more money, and that'll make us get the most competent people. when it's just a band-aid approach. And the problem right now has gone so systematic that again, as I said last go around, I think it's going to take decades to actually fix at this point. And I think the fact that the agenda is so strong right now that it trumps all of that. Okay, because the people that are at the top and the people that are at City Hall they're more concerned with their agenda right now than they are with fixing the problems.
Well, I think, Marlon, think about it. When we got on the job, right? What was the best training apparatus, right? You go to training seminars, you can go to different training, but the best training apparatus, and John talked about the other day, I would say, was being a brand new cop and learning from the other cops, the cops that did the job. I wanted to do intrusive police work. I wanted to do anti-crime work because I saw the guys doing anti-crime, right? And I was fortunate enough to be assigned to Impact Foot Post, where there were a couple of senior guys that had gotten a little trouble, but they became mentors in Impact. Awesome guys, by the way. Shout out. They know what I'm talking about. They did anti-crime work. They made the job so much fun, right? They were senior guys. They knew how to make the job fun, but they taught us how to do real police work. They taught us how to have street legal encounters. They taught us what to look for, what observations to make. They were already implanting that chip in our head of how to be cops. We got some great comments here. And I think I'm going to get into some of these comments, but I think that's the best training apparatus. Your sergeants, lieutenants, yes, they're going to train you, but they may be bogged down with their responsibilities and their liabilities that they may not have that time and effort, but learning from the other cops. So I say sometimes the new cops that are there in some ways suffer from like only child syndrome, right? Right? Because sometimes I tell people, if you have one kid, it's actually harder than if you have several kids. And the reason why is, and people know it here, if you're a parent, if you have 2 and 3 kids, your kids, as they grow, they start to almost parent your kids, right? They'll teach your kids how to do things. They watch each other, and it becomes easier as a parent. So the same thing is for the NYPD. If we have qualified cops that are doing the job and they start to take care of the cops and teach them in a way that the sergeant lieutenants can't. So Greg Gordon, shout out to you, brother. Great guy. He says, Eric, there aren't even qualified detectives anymore. You're right. That's sad. A lot of the squad guys are hooks and don't take senior detectives' advice when working a case. First of all, I'm happy to hear that there's even any senior guys, because I know your gun, Mike Smith, fantastic cops that I know that became detectives, real cops. Someone said here earlier, I think it was TC, who said, no one's born a cop. You're absolutely right. You become a cop, right? First, you're a police officer. You're wearing that uniform. You're out there doing the job. It's an honor to transition from police officer to be called a cop. But you're right. There's no qualified detectives. And especially because this administration, it's very questionable on the practices of promoting, of who we're promoting to detective. We see numerous times where females that are close to Jeffrey Madry have been promoted to first grade detective within a 3-year period or a 2-year period. They were promoted 3 times: detective 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade, with very to little or no experience at all. This is very detrimental. Patrick Donahue says, recent hires of any law enforcement officers anywhere are the best recruiters of that block of instances are sour that it will trickle down. Absolutely. Look at these numbers right here. How do we get people to replace them? Yeah, you can put out recruiting posters. You can have an effort to target colleges, universities, or the military, but there's no better tool than word of mouth, right? For some people, it's a deity. There's a family line where the uncles are cops and their brothers and sisters, they have become fathers. They have children, and those children become cops. That's word of mouth. Word of mouth is the most important tool. You're spot on, Patrick Donahue. But we see this hole, this gaping hole, this sinking hole that we're losing cops. How do we refill that? Not just with numbers. And now we see comparison with hiring. Look at this podcast. Marlon was terminated. I was a target by the Overzealous Civilian Complaint Review Board. John left the job. Sal left the job. Ron and Rob, fantastic leaders. They're no longer employed with the NYPD. Tom Joyce and Pete Fuselli, who do 10-4 Tavern, by the way, a great show. Who's Who cast of guests. Check it out. They're no longer in law enforcement. So we lost this alpha male and alpha female presence. And I don't mean reckless cowboys, but people that have competence and confidence to pass on that torch. And this was done by design, John. Marlon. This wasn't a mistake. This was exactly what you said. It's the agenda.
Yeah. I appreciate you mentioning me in the same sentence as Mike Smith, but I was an intel guy, and squad guys, I give a lot of respect to squad guys because the nonsense they put up with, when I went to intel, I thought, you know what, I'm not ready for the squad. I'm not ready to put up with the BS that these guys are doing. In a couple of years, I thought maybe I could learn from intel. A couple of years in, but I also went in there thinking that I would be a citywide FIO and continue doing search warrants, which I loved. And after a couple of years, I realized how much BS most of intel is. Because I've said this before, it's part of the problem with the job. Not only are we losing that experience, but we're not allocating properly, the people that we do have, So I realized a couple of years in that this was a waste of my time, and I remember having conversation with guys thinking, you know what, because another former FIO assistant had left intel to go back to the DB because he was another active guy who preferred the streets, So I remember having conversations with people saying that I'm thinking about it too. But the thing is though that the job is just broken in so many ways, so many ways that I think we'd literally be here for hours. The fact that there's no apparatus to properly train younger cops and to pass down the knowledge that older experienced guys have is a problem. I mean, for me now, when I was pulled into intel, the knowledge I knew of in regards to the street, the crews that we had in there, I took with me to intel. And I thought about this a couple days ago with that shooting in the 7-1, because one of the problems is, I believe one of the reasons why that shooting happened is because this job is so young and the experience leaves. Once the experience leaves the precinct, the prior knowledge of where those crews are in the precinct and who are really the problems in this precinct or where the threads lie between the connections leaves with it. So now when that experience leaves the precinct, you get the new guys who take up those roles to enforce those crews and problems. They have to start from zero again and learn who those problem people and to connect those threads again. And that's why you see that gap. And that's why we go through years of the early teens where a lot of these crews were kind of they had a lot of prosecutions, a lot of crew cases, a lot of conspiracy cases. And then we have a couple of years where there's nothing that push is gone because those cops were promoted elsewhere or those cops retired. And then you have those crews start building up again, which is why now in New York City, we also have a drill rat problem, because those younger those perps who are younger now are now growing up and the drill rap is a major problem with the gangs now. And the precinct personnel, I'm sure, don't have the knowledge of who these kids were when they were younger, or those threads, I say. So the problem is systematic in the NYPD, and I don't know where do we start to fix it,
Well, for one, I think it's extremely humble of you to say that you're not a detective like Mike Smith, these other guys. And I think they would actually disagree with you. I think Mike Smith, awesome detective, by the way, good friend of mine for many years. But there are different types of detectives who play different roles. There are squad guys, and the apparatus that you did in Intel. Michael Fried says that Intel is more of an analyst job. Analytics is so important, and being an analyst in Intel. I mean, and not only that, I see it here. sometimes I'm like, wow, it worked out great. Unfortunately, not for you, but that Marlon is in this position because with the Finance Unfiltered family, you do some amazing investigative work that really supports this podcast and this network. I mean, there's stuff that goes on behind the scenes here that Marlon that you do that I'm always impressed with. I'm like, man, you know what? It's like almost like I'm glad he's on my side, So the stuff that you do is awesome, but there's different facets and different detectives, right? And also, I think people should understand there's different facets of cops, right? So when we talk about police officers becoming cops, I think that's something important, right? There are different cops. Some guys are awesome at making arrests of volume wise. Some guys, they have that trained eye. They look for specific things. Some guys are into looking for narcotics. Some guys are into looking for guns. And some guys are just great utility guys, and they're great on different teams because they make a great balance and they're good. They have a little excellence at everything. They're kind of like a jack of all trades. And that's what we need, right? We need people that have that ability to have potential to do different things. And I think that's really what a cop is. Someone that gets that trained eye, makes those good observations, ability to work with others. You have to have that thick skin. And I think it's also important. I think sometimes people don't want to talk about this. You have to have a little good humor to you also. To be a good cop, you have to work well with others. You have to have a good sense of humor. You can't be too straight-laced and take yourself too seriously. It's just not going to work. If you're going to be a cop, that's a major point there. And something, unfortunately, I see that we're losing with these new guys. They don't have that same camaraderie and same level because everyone's taking things too seriously, or maybe they didn't really want to become a cop. They're just there for the short term. They're just using it as a stepping stool. So that's, to me, that's a problem. It translates to everything. What are your thoughts on that, Marlon? I think, as far as people having the ability to work with others, losing that humor, that joking around with cops, I think that also helps that brotherhood from guys not wanting to leave because they have where they feel like these people are important to me. They're my brothers and they're my sisters.
I do. I agree. That is a major part of it. And unfortunately, what I think happens now is that you get, that comes from a shared experience that you have, you may not be the same, say the same generation of cops, you may be put in a squad, in a unit with some old timers in there who are running around in the 90s, or running around in the early 20s or early 2000s when you were a rookie. But you have that shared experience of being in those in progressing your way in a precinct, from going from patrol cop to a special teams cop, and then these guys went to narco or whichever other specialized unit. But you have a shared experience. And what I find now is that a lot of camaraderie in these units is going away because a lot of the cops being put in these units don't have that shared experience. A lot of them are hooks and or contracts, and they've skipped that process. So it's hard to relate when you're joking around, or you're talking about, I had this CI who was like a mess. I had to bring him a court and he was a mess, and they'll have a similar experience because they did that process too. But a lot of the younger guys now, they skipped an entire process in their police career. And I think that's one of the things that hurts the job now. And that's why, there are a lot of, besides being contracts, a lot of reasons why they skip that process or they breeze through that process in a shorter time frame is because we have less cops now, whereas it took me years to get into special teams. It's like a lot of these young guys are in special teams in like a year, 2 years, you're still a rookie and you're now in whatever they call in crime today, anti-crime today. And I think that again, that's something that hurts the job. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this, right? Because I think you brought up a good point, right? You're talking about special teams actually doing the work. We're talking about the numbers here, right? So we're talking an exponential, just exponential amount of police officers leaving. And this crisis for retention, how could it affect us in the future? There's something that could affect us for decades. And I always say the most important apparatus of policing, the bedrock and foundation of policing, is doing intrusive police work. But with that, we talk about quality over quantity just in general for most things. Do you think that there is a quality, and I'm curious from the chat here, any friends and listeners here, do you think that there is a quality versus quantity comparison when we talk about policing? Now, policing is not a one-size-fits-all. Let's talk about New York City, right? Because the way you police in New York City obviously is going to be different than some rural area in Idaho, maybe. But for New York City, do you think it's important for the apparatus on a number that we have? We talk about manpower, right? And a lot of our police officers, unfortunately, are not utilized properly. And I think that's what's the problem with the NYPD, or I'm sure other agencies, but we're not utilizing people properly, not to their potential, and we're not using proper positions. Like, I believe I've always had this argument, these 72-hour fixed posts after a shooting, I think really don't do much. I think that there was a study years ago, I have to find it, I think it was by the FBI, that after a certain amount of time, that it almost becomes like statues, and people don't, it's not a warning sign for crime, and they just kind of work around it. So do you think there's a quality versus quantity when it comes to cops? Do you think the manpower is important? Do you think it's important that we have a manpower presence, or it doesn't matter the number we have? It's more important that we have quality police officers doing the right job. What are your thoughts on that? I think we should go into that. And I'm curious from our chat of friends and listeners, do you think the manpower is important, or it's just quality versus quantity conversation here?
That's a good question. I think if you have quality police officers, there's a certain fine line that you could walk between the amount of cops that you need. Yeah. That to effectively patrol or effectively do your job, and if you have high quality cops, like I said, a high quality cop could do the work of multiple cops, Now, granted, if you have that guy in certain patrol, in certain enforcement functions, you're going to need more than one cop, of course. But what I'm saying is that a quality cop, especially when it comes to being an investigator, a quality cop could do the work of multiple underqualified cops. Okay, and because that quality cop knows where he can kind of not so much cut corners, but they know how to get things done within the bureaucracy, And I think, for instance, if you have let me give you another example. Let's go back to the precinct. You have a quality cop. A quality cop knows who are the problems in the area. They know how to interact with the problems in the area, and they know who they shouldn't. You know which people you should shake hands with, and which other people you shouldn't. You gotta be that tough, stern police officer too. And that's something that's lost when you have a poor quality trained cops. They who also don't know how to apply a certain common sense and moderation to applying enforcement. Those cops would those are the people who are going to give grandma a ticket for riding a bike on the sidewalk, when that was meant for the perp who's looking to, for the problem people in the neighborhood who are looking to target people. So I think there's a certain amount of quality that allows you to walk a fine line between having quantity of cops. I would rather have quantity. I would rather have quality than I would quantity.
Special Hagen makes a great comment here. I have to agree with this, and I think this is obviously a deeper rooted issue. So he or she says, by the way, thank you so much. Great friend to the podcast here. Says you have to have competent management with integrity at the top. Yeah, no doubt about it. I got to read that again. Okay. You have to have competent management with integrity at the top. Those are two important factors. You're right. Competence with integrity. And those go hand in hand. The quality and quantity are irrelevant if you have corrupt and inept people at the top like we have now. Yes, but unfortunately, what are we seeing right now? We're seeing that the NYPD, the boots on the ground, are they're operating right now without clear leadership. And we've shown that, thank God, there's a good system in place because the boots on the ground are still doing the job to the best of their ability. And we've seen the byproduct of it at that recent active shooter event. Did it look like a mishmash in some ways? Yes. But overall, our cops, our boots on the ground went into danger and they did their job with failed leadership that's going on right here. But I do think when we talk about this conversation, I think manpower is important to a point. But I think quality police officers, the most effective and suitable, is far more important than quantity. Because if we had 40,000 that fit this DEI agenda, and they were all meek, timid, and docile, did not have the characteristics, attributes, the masculinity, traits for men and women to do the job, we'd be in a world of hurt. So it's important that we have people that have those characteristics and attributes that have a desire to do police work, have a desire to help people, have a desire to do intrusive police work. Intrusive police work is the most important. That doesn't necessarily mean just make an arrest, but have the ability to talk to people, to be intrusive, have conversations, to want to be involved in things. As a cop, you have to be nosy, right? You have to get involved. And so that's why I say quality over quantity. And I think what's more important sometimes is we give the illusionary effect that there is more manpower there is out there. And I would say, doing anti-crime, if I was a sergeant, I'd rather have a team of 3 cops that are outstanding, that know every crew in that neighborhood. They know the families of all the perpetrators, the person of interest. They know who's wanted. They know what makes that area tick. They know exactly the crime trends, patterns, and clusters for that particular precinct. That can build an effective team. But if I have 10 cops and they don't have those abilities, then we're not going to have that illusionary effect. And what's important, and I would say, for instance, in Police Service Area 7, when the person of interest, when the violent predicate felons would see the black van was the van occupied by anti-crime cops. We knew if there was a potential shooting that night, it'd probably stop, or it would deflect and distract some attention for that night, enough for us to investigate it. So it's that illusionary effect from quality police officers that balances out that manpower presence. Manpower presence is important. It's important to a point of how we strategically place our police officers. But this mobile field force that's operating right now with the NYPD on a constant basis of just putting cops in a spot, they're just potted plants. Even if they're qualified, if they're in a location they're unfamiliar with, they're working in a place that they're having to leave their permanent command. That's a problem with logistics. They may not have all their equipment necessary. They're not in an environment where they're prepared by actually doing crime analysis. Then they're just a potted plant. And that's why I say, in order to have quality work, we need quality leadership to actually strategically place them and actually do proper investigations. But just moving the pieces around just so you see a cop, to me, is not a plan.
Yeah,
and that's just about quantity.
Yeah, and we keep seeing that every day. I've noted a couple of times that it's now in 3 weeks, there was a shooting. There was a video of rookies breaking up a fight in Times Square, and the rookies, their attempt to break up the fight is just lackluster, and they refuse to put force on the perps, so throw them in cuffs, and you see the perps kept going back at each other, until they broke loose from the cops, and then they actually got into the fight again, and the cops had to roll around with one of them on the ground. And again, this is why you need quality policing, and you need young guys who are well trained and knowledgeable and want to be there and are being given lessons that they're not being taught in the academy by experienced guys. Otherwise, you just have a potted plant there and what's that doing? In this case, those guys things could have gone sideways had one of them had a weapon on them, because certainly in the video, none of them were even held or frisked. So the problem is you what we're getting now, the product that we're getting with the NYPD is people who you know, they're just there, but they're not putting in the they don't want to be the actual cop. You're just the uniform that's there, and that, I think that's a problem. That's why the quantity, it doesn't matter if you have people who aren't the quality of cops that the streets that you need to actually effectively police.
Lily, great friend to the podcast. She's always here. We appreciate Lily. How you doing? She actually asked a great question. I think something that we should go into. So Lily says, what do you guys think of community policing? So that, to me, it's kind of a loaded question, but I think it's a good question, right? Because there's different aspects of policing. I always say the most important aspect of policing is intrusive policing. If I was commissioner, I would say we're doing intrusive policing. Everything would be surrounded by that. Community policing is involved in that. So what is community policing? I think that's the question we have to answer first. I think it was completely distorted under former Mayor Bill de Blasio and obviously segued into Eric Adams also. And this idea is that community policing is where we strip away from doing police work where we're making arrests. So this is a great article here where it talks about keys of community policing. So it says here, community policing is a philosophy and a strategy where law enforcement agencies collaborate with the community to identify and solve problems that cause crime and disorder. So that is by textbook definition of community policing. But I think community policing was completely distorted with former Mayor Bill de Blasio, where we're going to distract and detract from doing intrusive police work that may lead to an arrest, right? We're going out to basketball games. We're going out to hug people and have coffee with a cop. And those things are nice. They're nice suggestions, and they're great supplements to intrusive police work. But that's really what community policing is. It's supposed to be a collaborative effort where the police department has a relationship with the community to solve crime, to stop crime, using the community as a tool to stop the crime. And that's not what we see, right? That's not what we see. What we see is it's just the police department hugging people and kissing them. And it's all well and good. And that's where it got distorted. I remember asking people, I'd say, so tell me, what do you think is a good cop? Asking some kids. Oh, the guy that you see hanging out at the basketball game, the one that gives ice cream on a car stop. Those are nice suggestions, but that's not necessarily what makes someone a good cop. And it's someone that may make an arrest, someone that may help an old lady walk across the street. It's someone that has the ability to do all different aspects. So great question, Lily. I think that community policing is fantastic. It's that collaborative effort, right? Thank you to producer Jack, by the way, pulling up some information here. I think that's such a fantastic thing, but it was completely distorted by former Mayor Bill de Blasio and taken to a different level, of course, with Eric Adams, because now what we see with community policing is it may attribute to potential private contracts and corruption and nepotism with promotions and this DI movement. So community policing, while it could be a great tool, it could also be distorted, and it could be something that's not, it's actually something negative.
Yeah, I agree. I think community policing is a euphemism they use for like progressive policing is what they really mean. Because think of it, like community police, I think it's such a silly term that we separate that from policing, you know? I mean, the best cop is a cop who knows his area, knows the people in his community. You know, he feels that he's as much of the community as he is a protector of the community. You know, to me it's a little silly for the police departments to have done what they've done with that term. You know, I mean, think of it. If we had to me, if you really want to get to community policing, first of all, we need the manpower, first of all, right? But we also need the experience in the precincts. We need to stop denigrating the role of the precinct cop. You know, if now, back when I left, one of the reasons why I left is because they weren't giving out shields in the FIO's office. If I tell you, if I had my shield in the FIO's office, would I have left the precinct? No, no way, no way. Because the most fun I had on this job, I met some great people in Intel, fantastic people, and those were the people that made being in Intel fun. But the most fun I've had in doing actual police work was when I was in the precinct. So the problem is that we denigrate the role of the precinct cop, when there really should be, there really should be a way to reward the experience that stays in the precinct. But I think that calling the community policing, separating it from the actual policing is kind of silly, because if we stop denigrating the role of the precinct cop, the street cop, and we give precinct commanders the autonomy to actually be a leader and to actually make changes in their precinct, instead of having to defer to 1PP for everything or ask the chief permission for everything, And if we actually gave cops that we treated them as adults, okay, and we tell them what's expected of them and what'll happen to them if they break the trust that the department gives in them, and they break their oath, and they don't live up to the job that's expected of them. We treat them like adults, then I think we would get community policing, but we wouldn't have to give it its own special category, that when they do that, the reason why they do that is because what they really want is progressive policing. They don't want enforcement. They want more time spent at barbecues and being the event, as opposed to what we're supposed to be doing, which is protecting the event, protecting the location so others could have the event, and so that's my entire problem with that term.
Great comments, by the way. I want to thank the chat. I love our friends and listeners. So we got a great comment here, but before I just say that on this comment, it comes from hold on, this comments are flying in here. Scott Wagner, detective from Spanish Harlem. First of all, I just want to say I was housing predominantly most of my career, and working for the NYPD. So Scott Wagner was part of housing before the merge, when housing was its own police department. I will say this, hands down, the two best community police officers were housing police officers. And the reason why is because when you're working in housing, you're working literally in people's backyards, and you're constantly dealing with the same people. So you have to build a rapport, unlike where you work at a precinct where it may be more transient, and you may deal with some people who are there as tourists, and you may never see them again. But in housing, you see the same people constantly. And also correction officers that transitioned to the NYPD, those were also the best community police officers, having the ability to build rapport, have conversations with people. Awesome. So Scott Wagner says, I was original housing police before the merge in 95. We wrote the book on community policing. Love it. Thank you so much. Scott, if you can tell us what that looks like, we appreciate what that looked like for you to write the book on community policing. Rob Lucash, fellow Finest Unfiltered family, great comment here. Here we go. They're flying in here. Community policing is every interaction. It's not having coffee and donuts or sing and rap. Time to act like cops and break the silos. That's right. It's not just having coffee with someone. It's actually meaningful interactions, meaningful relationships. Maybe you help a kid who gets off the street by arresting him, who's involved in a gang because he had to be initiation, as far as initiation goes. And maybe then you get him into a program to play basketball or cops and kids. To me, that's community policing. Stephen S., another great comment, flying in here. Community policing does not come out of communities. Ridiculous. It's a lie. I'm sorry. Community policing does not come out of communism. That's ridiculous and a lie. Absolutely. Absolutely spot on, Stephen, right? It's not a socialism aspect. So I think community policing is important, but we've also put in legislation that's actually stripped away from it. I would say anti-crime police officers are doing community police work. I would collaborate with the community. I would talk to them. I would actually talk to the the person of interest in the street. If someone got out of jail and was also, we had a lot of parolees in PSA 7 and PSA 4, a lot of parolees, I would talk to these guys. I would build a rapport with them. We would joke around, have a good time. And these guys would give me information, or maybe I would help them out with their parole officers, or we would build a relationship. Or if they saw something, would tell me, or you know what? If they did commit a crime, at least we built a rapport. But you know what stripped away from that, Marlon? Body cameras. Body cameras really stripped away from you having those organic conversations. I would hang out. I'm sure you know, Marlon, you're out in the streets. You see a couple of guys you dealt with before. They might be perps, but you know what? They're not committing a crime right there and then. A couple of guys hanging out in the corner. You're joking around. They're joking and clowning on you. You're building rapport. It's a relationship. But the body cameras really stripped away from that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so too. I think the entire technocratic agenda strips away from community policing. You know, when the communities will soon have drones flying over their house or their neighborhood 24/7, how do you think that makes them feel? Does that make them feel like the police department is even more friendly, or are they becoming more militarized and looking at you like a occupied territory, like a territory they have to occupy? You know, it absolutely does strip away community policing. And I think what else hurts community policing is not having enough manpower to be able to give cops the time to build a rapport with the community and with people in the community. If guys are going from job to job to job and you know they're doing the work of 3 other cops, then how does that give them time to actually become part of the neighborhoods that they're policing? Yeah, these are all problems that are happening now, and yet the department will keep throwing out the word community policing, you know, and thinking that community policing is the police holding some event, some party or some other social event, and to them that's community policing, and it's completely like bogus, you know.
So Scott Wagner, who was former housing, left that great comment. Followed up on it. I asked, what does community policing? He said they wrote the book on what did it look like. This is exactly the key definition. This corresponds to definition of what Jack pulled up earlier, right? Jack, if you could pull that up again, because this corresponds perfect with that comment here. And that comment comes from Scott Wagner. We solved most of our cases because the community came out to assist us. That's exactly the key definition. The key components of community policing are a collaborative effort with the police department and the community, having that relationship to solve crimes. So Scott Wagner, shout out to you. I hope you're enjoying retirement. That's exactly what community policing is. But what we saw with former Mayor Bill de Blasio and the inception of the Neighborhood Coordination Officer Program was not that. It was, it made cops believe that that's what it was going to be. But it was just scarecrows, and it was just cops. There were some cops that are neighborhood coordination officers that were great, that really wanted to do that. That's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to mend that relationship. But there were cops, unfortunately, that the mission wasn't really explained to them, or the mission was just to go out and go to some of these meetings, have coffee, hug and kiss some old ladies. While that might be nice, that is not what community policing is. These are supplemental effects. These are nice suggestions, but that's not what community policing looks like. Former Chief Julie Morrill, she thought community policing was dressing the entire precinct in pink for breast cancer awareness. But now I support breast cancer awareness, but to the point where it was nauseating, that was community policing. Don't get me wrong. She was great to some of these kids. She went out and bought them gifts, but that's not necessarily community policing. It's a nice suggestion, but community policing is exactly this. How do we suppress crime? How do we stop shootings? By collaborating with the community. So anti-crime police officers, when they're engaging people, that's community policing. They're doing the job to stop crime and collaborating. When the leadership, if proper leadership, attends these meetings, commanding officers, not just there for a minute, just to be there on the surface. When you have real conversations to find out the community's concerns and how to actually put a plan into place and address them, that's community policing.
Yeah, I see there's a good comment in here from Fast and Easy. He says body cameras are the best thing that has ever happened. Excuse me. It creates accountability, professionalism, and safety for both parties involved. Now, I think that body cameras in a lot of ways are kind of like a stopgap, right? And the reason why I say that is because would you need body cameras if you had a better product, policing product? Would you need body cameras if we didn't start lowering the standards of to get into police departments? Because nobody wants to join a police department anymore? Would we need body cameras if the problems that we saw from abuse of stop and frisk and numbers policing hadn't happened? Would we need body cameras? So what I'm saying is basically there are institutional problems that the body cameras are looking at as like the answer to the poor community relations that are created by those institutional problems. Okay. Well, yes, that may be true at all of us as body cameras help save my life. But the problem I'm trying to say here is that the institution of policing has systematic problems right now, and they're not being addressed. And because they're not being addressed, technocratic measures such as body cameras and drones become the answer, because the problems are growing and festering and becoming so big that the only way to solve it is to temporarily put a patch on it with body cameras. I mean, think of it. When does it stop? Okay, today we have body cameras. Tomorrow we have drones. Is the next step going to be something that monitors your heart rate too? Is it when does the measure stop? When if you don't trust the police officers and the institution of policing, then we become a society that's we're going to become like China. So my thing is, we need to fix the institution of policing first. Okay, we already have the body cameras. We have already lost that fight. Okay, my thing is, we have to fix the institution of policing right now before we keep heading down this technocratic road. Otherwise, biometric technocracy will be next. I see your comment, TJ.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, we talk about body cameras, we're talking about drones, this technology. I do believe that we're moving into this era, and I do believe it's going to happen in our lifetime, where everything is moving to AI, robotics. It's really changing the game for the world, especially policing. So, Veronica Electron, great friend of the podcast, says body cameras and cell phones with cameras took all the policemen powers away. They're not proactive anymore because any mistake will potentially end their career. So that's a great point, but here's why. The why is this. Body cameras in itself, it's a tool, just as I said earlier. If you're painting a precinct pink for breast cancer awareness, it's nice, it's suggestive to support breast cancer awareness. It's good to member the community. But at what point is that tool now something that's a negative thing, that we're doing it to a point it's not effective anymore, right? A car, you drive a car, it's a fantastic tool, right? But I could use that car as something negative. I could use that car, God forbid, to hurt someone, right? So any tool could be effective. And I think the body camera is an effective tool. The problem is it's how it's utilized. It should be utilized as a suggestive, as a supplemental tool to a police officer. When a police officer testifies why they took action, we're talking about Graham versus Connor, which is a Supreme Court case about what's happening in real time. So when a police officer has a body camera and someone's able to view it, maybe it's a civilian complaint review board or a court case, we need to have an adult conversation, say, okay, now we're looking at it in a controlled environment. We're looking at it from one dimension, not where the police officer saw it in real time in a 360 aerial view or a bird's eye view, much different than what's happening in a controlled environment, in an office such as Civilian Complaint Review Board, and we need to balance that. But unfortunately, we lost that. And we have, for instance, the Civilian Complaint Review Board, untrained investigators, and those that have no experience doing policing, watching in a controlled environment and make an assessment on how the police officers took action when the police officers were operating in real time. Much different plane, different dimension, and we're not taking into account Graham versus Connor, which gives police officers the right to take action based on what they felt in that moment. So I think, and I've always said this, I think body cameras are good for major incidents, not minor. So how do I say it? So God forbid, Marlon, if you and I were working together and we were transporting a female prisoner, and God forbid she alleged that we raped her, clearly that body camera would exonerate us right away. That's a major incident. But it's the minor problems minor issues where I think body cameras can distort things, such as you're involved in a tussle. Let's say you and I are potentially, rhetorically speaking, arrest a violent perpetrator, and it turns into a physical confrontation and a tussle. That body camera doesn't necessarily capture every movement and every subtlety. And there may be things that we see that the perpetrator is doing, those subtle movements that we find could be a danger, where someone watching in a controlled environment may not see. And that it doesn't necessarily support that confrontation. So that's why I think body cameras need to be used as a supplement and not the hierarchy when we're explaining a story.
Chief,
that
more of
human
those
element
calls,
still, I
people saying
think,
their
far more
robots are
supersedes.
You there?
Yeah. Background noise.
I think yeah. You're
But,
muted.
No problem. It's the video Jack was about to put on. It's okay. It
Oh,
happens. So I just wanted to say
I'm
that's
muted
my
for a second.
analysis, that body cameras in some major instances can help you exonerate a police officer. But when it comes to minor everyday interactions, intrusive police work, that body camera can be used for too much scrutiny. It should be noted, this is a supplemental tool. It's not the hierarchy in a police officer's explanation or articulation of an actual police incident.
Yeah. Well, I also want to point out that look. There's been numerous cases where CRT guys were cited for not turning on the body cameras. Okay, so even though you have body cameras, you still have guys who turn off the body cameras. Okay, and apparently that was perfectly fine with under Chell and Cass. So my point is that it doesn't fix the problem, and even more so, because they were able to turn off the body cams. What are we gonna get next? We're gonna get body cameras that you can't turn off at all, that you have no control whether it comes off, or maybe it'll come on at some automated period where it knows that you're on patrol, and comes off when it knows your tour is over, so you won't have any control. You see, the problem with that in a low trust society is that you become you become China. You become a technocratic authoritarian society where everything is watched and soon, if we keep heading down that road, it'll be robots that are policing us, and that's not good. And that's why I say that we need to fix the problems that are in the police departments in general, and the institutional problems in the police departments that are from the top. Okay, and until we do that, the body cameras we're gonna get more biometric surveillance tools. It's because they're gonna say what they're gonna say is the body camera isn't enough. Okay, he was able to turn off his body camera. We need this to monitor their heart rate. We need this to watch them. We need more cameras. Because we're going into a low trust society, and that's not good for anybody. And it's certainly not good for the communities. Okay, because if they feel that they're being spied on more by the police departments, they're going to feel more apprehensive about working with the police department, and more they're gonna feel more hostility is coming from the police department than community policing, than the community policing model that they're telling us they're supposedly still abiding by. So
I think this is a good time, right? We're talking about community policing, talking about retention of police officers. That article that came up where an extensive amount of police officers have left the police department and we're not filling those seats. And if we are filling those seats, we're not necessarily filling them with the same qualified suitability that we had before. And with that, we're talking about body cameras and the apparatus of that and how that correlates to community policing. So, Lily, I want to thank you for that question. We really pose into this segment here. So we're going to segue into another segment. So before I bring up Jack is finest unfiltered family here. What's interesting about Jack is not a police officer. He's a young man who's had an experience with media and radio. He's a team member of the finest unfiltered family. Does a lot of our production, a lot of great stuff. Great job yesterday producing Sal's show. We had some technical difficulties, and it was Jack really behind the scenes that did a great job of pulling off that show. So Jack and I were having a conversation the other day, and I thought this is a great segment. So some of our friends and listeners, don't go anywhere yet. I'd like you to weigh in on this. We had a conversation about civil service exams. We're talking about police officers. How do we attract the most suitable police officers? And the question was, are civil service exams something that attracts the qualified police officers, or is it something that we're not getting potentially police officers we should get because of those exams? So hearing also from Jack and why a young man might want to be a cop now or might not want to be a cop is a great conversation. So the question is this, and we're going to get into the segment, Marlon. The question is this: should we continue to have civil service exams to have entry-level police officers? So let's bring up Jack and let's get into this conversation. Jack, how you doing, brother? I'm glad you're here. Thanks for helping out. Great job with the show yesterday. Jack really pulled it off. So, Jack, before we get into that, I just want to say this: civil service exams have been around for a long time, right? If you're going to be a New York City police officer, you have to take this test to get yourself on a list to eventually get potentially called for a background investigation hiring process, which I think correlates to what we're talking about with these psychological unqualified or qualified licensed professionals to determine if you should be that police officer. So, Jack, what are your thoughts, if you could tell the chat, and want them to weigh in on a civil service exam and why you think it should be or not be implemented as part of the hiring process?
Well, yeah, good to join you guys for a change. Generally speaking, I'm only on with the Sal Greco show, so it's nice to be on New York's finest retired and unfiltered podcast in the morning for a change at 10:22 Eastern time here in beautiful sunny South Florida. But in regards to civil service exams, I don't see the point in having people take an exam when it doesn't measure their capability for doing an actual job. If you want to be a police officer and you're going to be apprehending people with guns, those that are very dangerous, even if you're going to be dancing with people in the Community Affairs Bureau, a civil service exam does absolutely nothing to measure your ability to do that job. As a matter of fact, it may be weeding out people who are competent for the job, because a lot of police officers were not exactly fantastic students in school, and as such, you can logically believe they were not great test takers either. So this idea that we're going to give out an exam that we're going to charge everyone $60 for, and by the way, this is applicable to every single agency in New York City. It's not just the police department, it's the fire department, sanitation, corrections, every single department. We're going to make people pay $60, many of whom are from low-income backgrounds, to take an exam that does not sufficiently determine whether they can do a job. And then their score on it is going to dictate whether or not they're allowed in. That seems like a very unfair barrier to entry, and one that is not going to be getting the most qualified people.
Fantastic points there, Jack. But I'm going to agree with you on this. It's these civil servant exams don't necessarily make a, we see it even on the job. Guys take the test and they go up to be, their chief, but the chief is like he was a terrible cop as a chief. He was a terrible cop when he was in the precinct, and now he's chief. But he can be chief now. He has 26 collars, 22 collars in the precinct, okay, in 5-6 years. but now he's chief, and he's a leader of hundreds of men. So I agree with you 100%, especially when it comes now. Don't get me wrong. I do think we need some sort of metric to determine who's going to become a supervisor and whatnot. But certainly to get in the door, I agree with you 100% that the civil servant exams don't do the job justice. I think the job would be better off with some sort of interview process where individual candidates, you fill out the paperwork, let them know your background, and you come and you have a sit-down interview and let them know who you are and why you're good at this job, just like you would, if you went for a corporate job somewhere. I think that might be a better metric of certainly to get in the door. Now, we have other metrics once you get into the academy, and you got to prove that you're worthy. You got to this door, but you got to prove that you're going to you're what we're looking for before we give you a badge and a gun and send you out to the precinct. But certainly to get in the door, I agree with you.
And also, I'll piggyback off that point, Eric. It looked like you froze for a minute, so I'll throw it to you in a second. But once you're on the job, there's literally no incentive to actually do any work because of the civil service exams. Because, like, if you want to get promoted, you hear everyone talking about, oh, I had a boss I didn't like, so I'm going to go study harder for an hour more after work tomorrow. So you don't have to conduct any arrests. You don't really have to show up and do anything. You can request an administrative post where you're doing a job that a police officer shouldn't even be doing, and yet you can still get promoted. Like, it's a system that doesn't reward hard work, and it unfairly so puts everyone on the same playing field. Marlon, you could go out, you can conduct 50 arrests, you could snag 30 guns off the street, you could get some of the most high-profile criminals in all of New York City, and it'll mean absolutely nothing when it comes to getting promoted. Someone who arrested one person off a 911 call 3 years ago could get promoted ahead of you. That doesn't make any sense. And now people are going to argue because of cronyism and nepotism in the NYPD, that would totally offset everything if this was all done by a discretionary process. I get that, but my solution would also involve an independent agency that makes a lot of these types of rules and oversees the police department. We need more federal oversight of the NYPD because it hasn't had enough guardrails, and it's tried to internally police itself. Wrongfully so. They have a legal team now, which does absolutely nothing. And the legal team, I would compare to a very glorified human resources department that makes sure a company doesn't get sued or that they're not in any legal trouble. So it's become a very powerful organization with all these systemic processes in place that are hurting the agency. And more importantly, they're hurting the public, because when you have lieutenant special assignments driving around people as chauffeurs making $300,000 a year, all of a sudden you have less resources. You don't have the ability to put cops down in the subway. And you look at it right now as well. Cops in New York City starting off are making $46,000 a year, roughly $50,000 a year after they graduate the academy, and $61,000 after a year. And the pay scale, by the way, I couldn't find it on the NYPD's website, but it goes up, as I understand it, very gradually until you get to the 5-10 year mark. So you're not even making enough money to move out of mommy and daddy's house for 5 years if you're taking this job. And also, the police department is going to be stocking the workforce with young, inexperienced officers because they're not going to be able to pay for all of the experienced guys as well. So they're kind of weakening the payroll a little bit by getting people who are less experienced on the job. That's another factor that no one's talking about.
So I always say opposition meets opportunity, and I think we have to have two separate conversations, my opinion. So what you said so far is that we need an interview process as entry-level police officers to determine if someone is suitable to be a police officer. So my opinion, I kind of make the comparison. If you join the military, you take what's called an ASVAB, right? It's basically an aptitude test to see what your qualifications are, to see what jobs you would be suited for in the military. So obviously the police department's a little different, right? You have to be suited to be a cop. I think that the civil service exam for entry level is necessary to make sure that you have just basic aptitude, reading comprehension, your math, and to get to the interview process. There is an interview process. That is the background check. That is the psychological, that if it's done properly to assess your character and also your physical fitness. To me, that is the interview process that really circumvents and eliminates potential nepotism and cronyism. Now, when it comes to promotion, I think that's the second conversation where I agree and disagree. I do like the civil service exam for promotion because it alleviates the discretionary process of potential cronyism and nepotism and puts you on a list that no matter what, if someone doesn't like you or you're not in the circle, you can still get promoted. However, I don't think it should be the only aspect for that reason, because if Marlon or myself is out there doing intrusive police work, we're making arrests, we're doing what's necessary to be a cop, and we're also highly regarded and respected by our peers, we should pass that test to move on to become sergeants in the police department. But unfortunately, if there's someone else that was kind of an empty suit and didn't do the job to that to the maximum in that aspect, they could potentially get promoted even before. And in many cases, especially now, if you're doing intrusive police work, and many of my active police officers that used to work for me, they're sergeants right now, they're out there doing intrusive police work and they're being good cops. Well, complaints do correspond. They're going to get a lot of complaints, and complaints can hinder you from getting promoted in your career, just as it did mine. I was halted from making captain because of civilian complaints. So in some cases, it's almost a better move to not do anything. And now the guy who's doing nothing has a better opportunity to move up. So I do think the test is important, but there should be other aspects with that test. Should also be a physical fitness test, and also should be some type of leadership course that you have to take to become a leader. There's no leadership apparatus and there's no leadership training in the NYPD. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so the concept of civil service, I kind of have gone over this briefly on and off the air. The concept of civil service was created in 500 to 600 CE, the Middle Ages in China, because it was a privilege to go and work for the emperor. So you had to take an exam. The exam was originally designed to eliminate nepotism. I've seen a lot of people in the comments talking about how the exam is a good thing. Ron Layson chimes in here saying the interviews are too subjective and they remove the interview portion of promotional exams for that very reason. Listen, guys, I think you all make very valid points, but at the end of the day, the civil service exam is still a bad system. And for some reason, all the other police departments, the sheriff's offices throughout the country that don't do civil service exams are having a ton of success. And not only that, they're poaching people from the NYPD, candidates that were thinking about joining the department, and bringing them to their department. So they must have a system in place that somehow, some way works. Part of the problem, too, is people in New York City are too institutionally brainwashed to change their way of doing things. When you talk to people who are working in civil service positions, they're so set on having these exams that they can't even think of an alternative. Devising an alternative is extremely tough. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it doesn't. You might need to offer an exam to determine basic competency, reading comprehension, mathematical abilities, all skills that are necessary for being a police officer for one reason or another, right? But at the end of the day, you can't be having an exam that makes or breaks their ability to get on the job when there's so many different components and elements to it. That's kind of the crux of my point.
Well, and also to that point, I've seen people in the academies who like, you wonder how they pass the civil servant exams, So even with the civil servant exam, I don't think it's you're getting the best quality recruits into the door. So I'm of the opinion that one of the problems with the NYPD is that we're so big, we're too big for our own good. And that if you had a smaller department, you'd be able to, it'd be harder for for these cracks to in the system to go on unobserved. I think because we're so big, it's easier for things to get lost in the system, and it's harder for like say 1PP to keep track of a lot of these things, or parts of 1PP to keep track of it, Like, do we think Tish knows everything that's going on in a department of 30,000 people? 30,000, supposedly 30,000, though we think it's a little bit under that, but it's more than 30,000 when you include the civilians. Do we think Tish knows all of that? No. I think we're too big for our own good, and one of the things that would help in that case would be a smaller department. And in that case, we can do these interviews and on a more intimate basis, and kind of more sift through the applicants that we're getting before we get them into the academy. And one of the unfortunately for us and for a lot of big blue cities is that we're now acting as a kind of like a minor league team for these sheriff's departments, now, which to their credit, it kind of helps them in the recruitment process, because you're already getting that's less effort for you to have to go through their record if they're already been a cop in New York or these blue cities. So,
well, great comment here from Crazy 10-7. So I'm going to put up on the screen real quick here. The civil service promotional exams have nothing to do with supervision or leadership. You're absolutely right. Spot on. That is the missing link. That's the major gaping hole in the NYPD. Rate memorization of an inapplicable rule book does nothing to select leaders or even supervisors. You're right. So while I agree, I also disagree with. I would not get rid of the civil service exam for promotions. I think it should be part of a segment, I guess you could say, or maybe there's a 5-point scoring list. Maybe one of those points is the test. One would be the physical fitness test. One would be a leadership course. One would be maybe an actual interview, and one could be actual assessment on your career, where we look at your jacket. But what I do think is necessary about the civil service exam is that it does negate the potential for cronyism and nepotism. Look at the cronyism and nepotism we have now with discretionary promotions. What would that look like if we didn't have a civil service exam and we were just appointing people to sergeant and lieutenant? It would be far more out of whack than it is now. And that could be scary. Now we're talking about not just the leadership at the top, we're talking about the frontline leadership, and everything could be distorted. So the question is, we're talking about the problems. What are the solutions? What are your solutions then? What would that look like? Because to me, talking about the promotions, but we also talk about entry level. The NYPD is so large, one of the largest armies in the entire world in comparison. How do you do just an interview process? I think we need a process that's streamlined to determine that, to make sure that someone has the characteristics and traits to become a police officer. Rob Lukash finds Unfiltered Family makes a great comment here, where he's saying we just need these things and they can learn while they're on the job, which to me is the purpose of the academy and also other police officers molding you. But we need to just make sure that they have the attributes to get to that point. So what would your hiring process look like?
Yeah, so first of all, let's take a look at what the exam measures and the skills that it tests, or at least what it allegedly attests, because I think it's important to have a little bit of a framework before we proceed in this discussion. First of all, looking at the exam notice of examination, I thought it was funny that there's no application fee and how you're supposed to select no fee as your payment. It goes to show the sad state of affairs and the desperation that exists within the department right now. But anyway, as we scroll down to page 3 here and look at some of the things that are being measured in the test, it measures allegedly, again, deductive reasoning, applying general rules to specific problems, inductive reasoning, combining pieces of information, information ordering, memorization, problem sensitivity, spatial orientation, visualization. Okay, all of these are skills that potentially could be used at some point in your career as a police officer. But I don't know which of them you're going to need right away. And I don't see how your ability to pick these things out on a piece of paper and bubbling in a multiple choice Scantron allows us to see that. So my proposed alternative is I'm going to take some of what Marlon proposed. We shrink the size of the police department and we spend more time intimately screening every single candidate and going through an interview process with them that's maybe even a little bit more objective. Like we go off the beaten path, talk about their motivation for becoming a police officer, their work history, get to know them a little bit more. Because right now we're just checking boxes. We talked about candidate assessment yesterday. Like we're just saying, is this person fit? Are they not fit? Are they qualified? Are they not qualified? We don't have an intimate system in place. To become a deputy sheriff in a lot of departments, you have to go through a very extensive interview process where you interview with the chief, you interview with someone from the psych section, you interview with maybe standing police officers in some cases as well. So like, I think there needs to be a more streamlined, structured process that brings people in and determines whether or not they're fit to do the job. You guys complain day after day about the job being meek, timid, docile, them recruiting the wrong people. I would agree with all of the above. But if you're going to alleviate those things, you need to get to know the person better and not view them as a number on a piece of paper, which is part of what, having civil service exams does.
Yeah, and to Jack's point, if you had a smaller department, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't have the problems you have with attrition right now. Okay, because we create a more intimate department that knows the exact needs of the specific communities and boroughs that they administer. And again, the things that are acceptable in Brooklyn aren't acceptable in Staten Island or parts of Queens. Okay, there are things that say, like, I'll give you one example, like loud music. People in parts of Brooklyn tolerate that a lot more than we would in single family houses in the outer boroughs of, say, Queens and Staten Island. So you have a smaller department, you have leadership that could more tailor their policies towards the particular boroughs that they serve. If their borough is more liberal, then we're probably going to get a little more liberal, measures. But in that case, we wouldn't have to worry about needing to continually check boxes just to get the academy ranks full, because we have a class coming up and we have and we need like 1,000 bodies. You wouldn't have the attrition problems that we have right now, where 300 people leaving every month puts a massive amount of pressure on candidate assessment division to fill those academy classes. So.
Yeah, and there's this like desperation as well to fit a square peg in a round hole. You can see Andrew Cuomo, this is from about an hour ago. He quote tweeted the article from AM New York that you guys were referencing and said, the NYPD is losing officers at a record level. Rebuilding it must be a top priority. The NYPD are NY's finest. It's past time to reverse this dangerous trend to protect our city. And then get this. My plan will add 5,000 officers, 1,500 in the subways with incentive bonuses to attract the best. Yeah, good luck with that, buddy. I don't see like it's multi-layered here, as a lot of people can kind of conclude based on our conversation. People don't want to take the job because it's not paying very well at the beginning relative to the amount of work that you're doing. The work itself in New York City, whether it be dealing with these migrant gangs, having to go down into the subway where you don't see the light of day for 10 or 12 hours, the housing projects where you're walking up 30 flights of stairs, as you know, Eric, like this job does not sound desirable for anyone on planet Earth. And then you add in the fact that you have terrible management who are telling you conflicting things all the time, with a very bad reputation cloud hanging over the department, and it becomes that more undesirable. And you start to realize why quantity has become prioritized over quality. They just need as many bodies as possible that they can put in those seats. It doesn't matter if they're turning off the experienced guys who are out doing the actual work because they're not relevant enough and they're easily replaceable as a number. And that's really where the whole problem starts and ends with the police department in New York City.
I just want you guys to analyze what you're saying, right? And because I kind of disagree with a lot you're saying, both of you, in a respectful way, in the sense that I get what you're saying. And I would love, in a perfect world, if I had the opportunity to sit down and interview every single candidate, because that's what I did when I was looking for the proper cops to be on my teams. I was looking for specific traits and characteristics. I didn't care if they had the skill, because I knew I could teach them. So I wish I could interview every single person and find, people that are stoic, people that have the ability to persevere, and people that are willing to learn and work well with others and have good humor and have leadership skills, a leadership ability. But this is a large department. And that's why I think that this interviewing process would not necessarily work. I believe the civil service exam leads to the interview, which is the background check. And then ultimately, the process that is supposed to weed people out that don't belong, if proper standards are met, is the academy. And I think that's where we lost it, right? We lowered standards in academy, which is why I think we're saying we need these interviews and stuff like that. But at the academy, if you were met with more challenges at the academy, I think the academy would weed out who is not meant to be a police officer. And those that have those attributes would find themselves to graduation, right? It should be challenging. I think the academy should be extremely challenging, just like joining the Marine Corps. When you face the Marine Corps, you cry in tears because you're so proud to become a Marine. Because you faced an extreme challenge. You should finish the academy and cry and feel like, wow. But most people finish the academy and feel kind of like unfulfilled, like, well, that was it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's as I keep saying, it's multifaceted. It's partially that the New York City Police Department Academy is not what it once was 10 years ago. And that comes from the recruitment and the retention problem. You guys have been talking a lot about AI and the impact that it's going to be having on the NYPD with drones, body cams. Have either of you ever seen the movie? And I'm asking this question to everyone watching out there as well at home. Has anyone ever seen the movie I, Robot with Will Smith? Okay, so for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a movie about robots taking over bureaucratic positions. It's set in the year 2035, I believe, which is 10 years from today's date. And there's one scene in particular which is particularly alarming to me, and it involves Will Smith, who plays a detective that's investigating a death of a CEO, which he believes was committed by an AI bot. But there was one part where there's a perceived takeover by said robots, and they storm the police station. And this is kind of what the NYPD has to be fearful of if they rely too heavily on AI. So I'm just going to play it, and then we'll react.
What?
Chief, more of those calls, people saying that robots are going.
So the reason that I play that clip is the NYPD is trying to get people who are stupid in the department, right? There's no doubt about it, with the illegals that they're trying to hire, the people that they're bringing in who are very weak, timid, and docile. They're relying upon AI because it's cheaper and easier than human labor, but they're putting themselves in danger because 10 years from now, if AI evolves the way we think it will, AI could end up overtaking the department and outsmarting it. That is a doomsday scenario that could end up unfolding. I don't ever think it's going to be that extreme, but if you're training AI to be smart up to a certain level and then it becomes smarter than you, that's a very dangerous spot to be in. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I think, I'm not sure it's going to happen like that, but I think the problem with the AI is that behind the AI are people, and it's a small group of people at the top who are going to be telling the AI what to do, to effectively do. or coding the AI, coding the algorithms, and that's the danger. The problem with the NYPD is centralization. And like Eric spoke last go around of the problem with how hard it would be to interview all these candidates. And I think that's a problem with the NYPD being the size that it is right now. It's not a problem if the NYPD is smaller, or if there's not an NYPD and there's a Brooklyn Sheriff's Department, a Richmond Sheriff's Department, and a Queens Sheriff's Department. It'd be smaller, and you'd have a more intimate department. I give you an example. Sheriff Wayne Ivey, he has a YouTube, or he had a YouTube, where he goes on ride-alongs with new deputies in his department. Now think of it. If the sheriff knows, now granted, New York City would still have more cops in each borough than Sheriff Wayne Ivey has. But I'm bringing him up because he knows you. Okay, you get in the door in the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, and Sheriff Wayne knows you. Okay, he knows. Okay, we just got this new guy Bethel over there. He gives a ride along with me. He knows you now. Okay, I think if the chief knows the new guy, or if the leadership knows the new guy, you're making him feel part of something. Okay, he's more inclined to appreciate his job, and to kind of be the quality cop that we need him to be, as opposed to if he feels like he's just a number. Chief Chelder doesn't know the new guy who just got transferred to the 7-3. He don't know him. And he'll never know him. And that new guy, once he gets there and he gets thrown on 17-hour tours consecutively, is going to start feeling like he's just a cog in the wheel, another number in the wheel, as opposed to the new guy in Sheriff Wayne's department. Even if he has to work 17 hours, the sheriff knows him. He feels when you feel you're a part of something, you're more encouraged to go the distance, and to whatever hardships may come. No job is perfect, okay? And even in his department, I'm sure there's grievances somewhere. But when you feel you're a part of something, you want to go the distance. You're more than happy to go in the trenches with leadership, than you are if you're just a number. And what I'm saying is, we get to the point where the job could properly screen and have an interview process for recruits if we have a smaller department. And also, because of that, you have less guys wanting to leave, because now they feel that they're intimately part of something, and their leadership knows who they are and cares about them.
These are great points. So I want to say this, right? Part of a conversation we had, Jack, the other day kind of corresponds to what Rob Lukash is saying here, right? You are just a tax number in the NYPD. Spot on. And what I tell you, Jack, we were talking, and I said, unfortunately, a lot of people have this idea that cops are stupid, and and maybe some are. But there's a lot of intelligent cops, and I agree that the civil service promotional exam should not be the only aspect to get people promoted. And the reason why I say that is there's plenty of intelligent people on the job I've met along the way that never got promoted. They weren't good test takers. They wrote books. They went to some very impressive schools, super intelligent, just didn't have those test-taking skills. So, and unfortunately, we don't get to see necessarily. There are some cops on the job that are just super intelligent. And what I tell you, I said the problem is the system. And I think maybe Rob Lukash is what he's talking about. The problem is the system, and you're taught early on, Marlon, if you can agree, you're taught early on to kind of like ride this wave that everyone is supposed to have this number. Rob Lukash and Ron Lacey did a great episode where they talked about quotas and stuff. I will tell you right now, I think there are definitely quotas. And you kind of have this number, right? Let's say it's 10 arrests a month, rhetorically speaking. Let's say it's 1 arrest. If everyone is supposed to have 1 arrest or 5 summonses, or you engage a certain amount of people, they want everyone to ride that plane. If you go above that, you're an overachiever. If you go below that, you're an underachiever. So what happens is there may be some super intelligent people that want to go out and do more, but they don't. They hold themselves back to ride that plane. And for the people that are underachievers, they just have to put a little more effort to make that plane. So everyone gets on this middle ground, and no one has a chance of seeing opportunity because it's not private industry. You're just a tax number. So Rob Lukash, I think you nailed it. So could AI replace just a tax number? In some ways, yes. In some ways, absolutely not.
So I think we need to find a very definitive, good form of practical implementation for everything we're saying. So we want to have a more streamlined, structured interview process. That's going to be one characteristic of it. We want sheriff departments in every single borough, and we want to kind of sectionalize things that way, which is a good solution because you have smaller departments that are policing a lot different, and they're tailoring their style to communities as opposed to using this one-size-fits-all model that, traditionally speaking, has not worked in a place like New York City, where politics, public opinion varies in a place like Staten Island and Queens and Brooklyn and Manhattan. It's all very different, right? So I like those solutions, but then how do you, budgetarily speaking, skim the cat? Do you have the state funding anything? Do you have the city involved more? Do you have the federal intervention coming in? We saw that implementation in DC. It's kind of gone disastrous, partially because there was no collaboration. What do you do in that regard? We already have a sheriff department in New York City, albeit not a traditional sheriff department. They actually work, I know a lot of people don't know this, they work for the Department of Finance, and they handle seizures of properties, investigations of white-collar fraud, more so those sorts of things than everyday policing. But I like the idea of having an actual sheriff department in every single borough. Some of them pull funding from the state, so we're not using the state police and state resources to supplement our police force. Instead, we're using funds to design our own police force in every single borough. I like that idea a lot better. Smaller police departments, more personalized interactions. You talked about Wayne Ivey. He's the prototypical example here in the state of Florida at building a good community based off his methods of policing, but not bending a knee in terms of enforcing the law. There's a fine line that you have to walk in terms of balancing those two things. So I like the idea of having personalized sheriff departments in each borough that enforce the rules based on the district attorney and the laws for each specific neighborhood that they just so happen to be policing. I like that method a whole lot better.
I think how do we get there is another conversation, and there's a lot of moving parts to that conversation that we really have to think out. But I think that speaks of the problem with New York City in general. That I think a better New York City or New York City region or New York metropolitan region, right, would be a better region would be competing boroughs, okay, as opposed to one entire blob, okay. If you had Manhattan competing with downtown Brooklyn, you have Brooklyn competing with Staten Island and Queens. You have a better ecosystem, okay, where each borough would be watching each other, okay, in terms of corruption and in terms of malfeasance and spending. And you'd have a state apparatus that would have the ability to monitor what's going on better, in my opinion, because I think New York City exerts a massive amount of influence over the state in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, even more so than the governor. So I think if the city was split up and these regions were governed autonomously and competing with each other for businesses, for quality of life, for the best usage of government resources, you'd have a better system in general. And from there, we get to the sheriff's departments within them.
I've been saying this for a long time. I'm a firm believer on small unit leadership breakdown. And I think that if we had each borough had its own police department with an elected sheriff, I think it would be far better than what it is now. Is it impossible to root out all potential corruption? No, but at least it could be minimized and it can be maximized to better oversight, better leadership, and someone that's more correlated with the community, unlike what we have now. The mayor just has too much leverage and too much power in appointment. The police commissioner is at the behest of the mayor. With that being said, I want to say we're 2 hours and 53 minutes into it. This is an awesome show. Great comments. Jack, I want to thank you for jumping in. Marlon, as always, I think this is a great show. So before we finish up, Jack, let's just get some closing arguments on you on your case of AI and also civil service exams. And what is your solution? And of course, we appreciate it. So for the chat that's in there right now, like, share, and subscribe. We appreciate it. Thank Jack for coming on. Talk about police stuff. And I think Jack has a great experience now. He was never a cop, but he's hanging out with all these former cops. So I think he's got a good perspective on cops and seeing them in a different light. So, Jack, if you give us some of those thoughts, tell us significantly, like, what is that main thing that you would change that would oppose the civil service exams? And if the NYPD is not downsized, what could potentially work?
So in regards to that, I think one of the first things we have to look at is how we're going to be appointing the chief sheriff. I know there's been a lot of banter back and forth. Marlon, you and Ron had a discussion about this on Monday as well. My solution would be to allow people to elect the head sheriff. Now, some people are saying if you elect the mayor and you get to vote for him, then you should be thinking that he should be able to do all of those things, and you should have confidence in the appointments that he's going to make. Unfortunately, we've seen probably the worst possible example of this thought process backfiring with Mayor Eric Adams, where he's made appointment after appointment who's been investigated by the FBI, or there's been criminal charges brought against them. Some have resigned under very shady circumstances. So this system where you allow the mayor, county executive, whatever public official it may be, to appoint everyone, in my opinion, doesn't work, even if you are electing them and do trust them to make the right decisions with certain positions. So my solution to that is that the people of each city, county, whatever we decide on, should be able to vote for the sheriff, and there should be debates. It should be like trying to run for mayor or city council, any type of position in New York City. There should be a very long process, and the people should have some sort of authority in saying how they want their communities policed. That's not to say that we're encouraging people to elect those in office that are going to be soft on crime and not allowing cops to do their jobs, because that opens up a can of worms in of itself. But there should be some autonomy of power in making those decisions. That's number one. In regards to civil service exams, I am very adamant about abolishing them. I don't think the civil service exam should be a thing anymore, even if you are waiving the fee associated with them because you're so desperate for cops. No more civil service exams. No more testing people based on outdated, antiquated processes that existed in Imperial China hundreds of thousands of years ago when our ancestors were not even thoughts in their parents' brains. We're not doing that anymore. The system in place does not work. So we need to have interviews, structured processes that measure comprehension, whether it be through physical, written form, something like that. Very bare bones and blueprint-ish so far still. I acknowledge that, but these are the solutions that we need in place. A streamlined interview process where there's intimate time spent with candidates, where we can measure who they are, we can understand their history and motivation for cops. And also, I'll double down and issue a challenge to the NYPD and other police departments. Don't put people on the same playing field where overachievers are punished and underachievers are not incentivized to work harder. That's part of the system at play as well. When you have a system like that feeding into the higher level ranks, then you're really screwed. So I'm going to challenge all of the police departments to find a way to reward people in the same way that those in the private sector who work in sales and are going 300% over their quota are being rewarded. I want that same system in place in the police department in New York City, or the 5 sheriff's departments that are in Queens, Kings, Richmond County, etc.
Jack, hold on 1 second if you can, before Marlon goes. I just want to say, some of our friends and listeners may be looking at this saying, here's another lefty lib kid. I'm not trying to insult you. Saying, here's all the problems with the cops. He never spent a day as a cop. And I get it. It sounds great. Let's interview everyone. It sounds great. What is that going to cost? What does that really look like? How is that done? Yeah. How we can't even get qualified psychologists to do proper analysis. How are we going to interview every potential candidate? You know, Ron Layson worked in candidate assessment. He would tell me that it takes thousands. It could take 30,000 recruits just to get a class of 3,000. How do we interview and vet 30, for instance, 30,000 people, potential interviews? How do we do that? What does that look like?
Well, let me just say too, Eric and Marlon and everyone out there watching, I've lived in 3 different states as an adult, and somehow New York City is the only place with any of the issues that we're describing. And I'll double down on that by pointing out that it's also like there's no other place that I've been where I've seen cops doing less work and showing off about not doing any work, whether it be standing in the middle of the street, chit-chatting loudly like they don't care, backs turned, not even watching the street, sitting in cars on their phone, not paying attention to people. Like, there's too many people that seem disinterested in policing. Like, they really don't care and they really don't want to be there. So I'm led to believe, guys, that having lived in other places and seeing the way things are, there's also an issue within the culture of the department and what's being encouraged and the values that are being propagated outwards by the people who are working there. I'm sure there's different jobs. Like if someone is dying, it's a lot different than if there's a traffic violation where someone needs backup, right? Like there's varying levels of this, but I've never existed in an area where cops seemed like they wanted to brag about doing less work, yet the unions are constantly talking about getting pay raises and how badly they have it financially speaking. So that's number one, but you do need to shrink the size of the department if you want any solutions. The size of it is creating all of these issues. It's the monster that's allowing the beast to exist. If you shrink your police force or if you section it off and each borough receives state allocated funding, you're all of a sudden looking at a very different power dynamic with very different leadership. You guys also like to make the point with Jessica Tisch. She didn't come up through the ranks. She didn't experience what the rank and file experience. I would echo those same sentiments, but maybe look at recruiting people from other departments who are familiar with other cultures. Part of the problem is we're saying you need to come up through the ranks, traditionally speaking. Guys, like CEOs for other companies are oftentimes recruited from other corporations. So this idea that you need to come up through this antiquated process rung by rung by rung on the ladder, and you can only walk on the same ladder that's creating the house is totally ridiculous as well. I want the best and the most qualified people running my department. Look at Bernie Carrick, who ran the department years ago. He was recruited from the Passaic County Sheriff's Office in New Jersey. I know he had a relationship with Rudy Giuliani, but it still speaks to the fact that recruitment from outwards may be part of the solution as well. And bringing in people with experience running, say, a 2,000-person sheriff's department instead of a 200-person police department in Florida or a 30,000 person police department in LA might be part of it as well. Bringing in people who have experience doing what you want to do in terms of the solution here.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of Jack's points. You know, it's good to have somebody who has a different perspective come on, and you know, it keeps us from being in a bubble. You know, Sal talks a lot about the Joe Cop, you know, and yeah, it keeps us from becoming Joe Cop, you know. And those of you who are saying this is never going to happen, well, that's not the right way to do it. That wouldn't be the right idea. Well, look at the system now. Is that working? Is it working? Well, you're getting more technocratic measures and AI and drones. And is that improving community relations? No. Is that improving the actual product of policing in the city? No. So again, what do you suggest? Because the current system that you have is not working. And if you care about the department, and if you even care about your pension, I keep saying this, if you care about your pension, you should want change, because your city competes. It has to compete for young people with the other cities of America. And if young people and people in general do not want to come here, if the best people no longer want to come here and create a business and bring money to the ecosystem of New York City, then your pension is in trouble in the future. So if you want to work in Walmart when you're 75 years old, then you should say we should continue doing business as usual. But if you don't want to work in Walmart when you're 75 years old, then you should advocate for things changing and for the product to become the best product it once was. It could be once again. Now, I see your comments in the chat, Samara. So you know about me, And you guys, I'm pretty sure I'm still in DOS, so you're welcome to run my name in DOS. I mean, I don't necessarily think it'd be an issue just to run my collars, but I don't care. I was an active cop, okay, and I didn't get into Intel by making a phone call. My name was put in to get in there. I was told to put in because they were looking to expand the FIO's the FIO's surveillance team, and I was recommended to drop my name in there. Okay, I didn't contact anybody. I didn't ask anybody to be in there. I was ready to go to narco. I knew the 7-7 narco team. Those guys were great guys. I had a working relationship with them. I was ready to go join them. I already had my CIs lined up. I was ready to go not hit doors, but I got a better opportunity and I ran with it. And you know, it like Inspector Layson and Chief Lukash said a couple episodes ago that you should work to get your name ahead of you. Okay, people should hear about you first before basically they see your name on an application, and that is spot on. And everyone, you know, we talk about how a lot of cops aren't prepared for the job and they don't have that warrior mentality, and we don't think they really want to be cops. If you really want to be a cop and you put in that effort, your name would always go ahead of you. Okay, you don't need to make a phone call to anybody, and I still believe that. Okay, I still believe that. So that's all. So again, thank you, Jack, for coming on. I think Jack's perspective adds a lot to this show, and I thank you guys again for listening to us. I think this is a great conversation we've had, and I think we should revisit it again because there's a lot that we need to talk about this. And I think we had some great ideas here that would work to make New York City a better place. You know? So
yeah, you know, Jack and I spoke about this the other day. I said, you know, it'd be a great segment to talk about civil service exams and promotional exams. Well, I don't agree with everything you're saying, Jack. I do think you bring up some great points. As I say, opposition meets opportunity. And that's why I say, what would that look like? We have to figure out what would that look like and what are the capabilities and limitations, right? I always say the effectiveness of a person or a team is being honest and saying, what are our capabilities and limitations? I always want to know those two aspects. I know what I'm capable and I know my limitations, which means I know my strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of a nicer way of saying it. If we could pull it off, it does sound great in theory. It's just the problem is nepotism and cronyism. Who conducts these interviews? What is the criteria? Do we have a specific template? Because we don't want it to become robotic either. And I think that's why the academy, going back to put an emphasis, I think the academy is so important that challenges are met and that we do not lower the standards, because it's the academy that I believe is the fundamental foundation that gets the proper assessment of who should be a cop or not, right? Weed them out. So, you know, I love the conversation. I do agree with a 5-borough breakdown. I've been saying that a long time. Smaller departments, it's better effective for leadership. You do get more quality. And I think, you know, I understand you say you lived in different places. And different places have different issues, different needs. Policing is not a one-size-fits-all. But as always, I appreciate, I think it's great. It shows also this is balanced on the Finest Unfiltered, right? For the majority of the Finest Unfiltered, we get a perspective of former boots on the ground with a police eye. Now we're getting a perspective, someone who's not served in the NYPD, what your thoughts are. And some people, oh, he was never a cop. Well, yes, that's the point. Let's hear from someone that wasn't a cop on what their thoughts are, what you see from the outside. Because what you see from the outside is not necessarily what happens on the inside also. A lot of things change because, you know, I heard it on early on. I told you, Jack, you know, I like to, you know, I went to the Marine Corps, I go to officer candidate school. I was always competitive. I want to do well. And I was told, you know, you have to find that plane and ride that plane. You don't want to be an overachiever. You don't want to stick out. So I thought to myself, wow, I have to dumb myself down, right? And that's a shame. But it's unfortunately the system, and I think we could do better. I appreciate your aspect. Jack, before you jump off, give us your closing statements. I appreciate it. Thanks for jumping on today. If you want to introduce yourself or to the friends and maybe they could, you know, throw some darts on you or say thank you.
Well, I mean, I would just like to say for everyone who's saying out there, oh, he wasn't a cop, he never worked for the NYPD. If you watch sports, if you go to a restaurant, does that mean if you never cooked before, you're not allowed to criticize the food that you're tasting? If you're watching a baseball game, are you not allowed to criticize a hitter's swing? I think sometimes having an objective outsider to offer an honest perspective on this subject matter is actually more important in terms of informing people about public perception. So that's number one. But number two, in terms of recruitment for this job, because I've seen a lot of people putting it in the comments, oh, we're not recruiting the right people. That's part of the problem. Well, think about trying to pitch someone my age, a little bit younger in their 20s about taking this job. Pay is not very good at the beginning. Conditions are absolutely awful. You're probably going to be put down in the subway where you don't see the sun for 12 hours, 6 days a week. That's going to make you go crazy. You have to wait 20 years to get a pension. By the time you get the pension, you're going to be in your 40s or your 50s, and you're going to have been miserable because you were dealing with terrible management, high crime rates, all that stuff. Oh, and the pension that you were promised might not exist in 20 years because the city is on the verge of bankruptcy. And by the time you get it, your life expectancy after you receive it will have shortened as well. Because as I pointed out yesterday, part of the pension system and the thought process behind it is people in these high stress roles are not living very long after they leave the job, whether it be by suicide, health conditions, or something else. I think the life expectancy for people in the Department of Corrections, where I spoke to someone the other day, was about 5 years after they get off the job. So I mean, people are more comfortable with the possibility of working at Costco in their 70s when they're going to be physically unable to work than they are about romantically thinking about joining the police department. So it's a widespread issue, and they're not going to be getting the same talent pool that they got back in the day when you were getting the kids from the neighborhood. Traditionally speaking, it was like, you know, the Italian and Irish kids from Staten Island and Brooklyn, like the hard-nosed kids who were good at enforcing the rules in the neighborhood. They became cops. They've either gone to Long Island, upstate Florida, or they're just saying no to the department nowadays anyway. Also, for a lot of young people, entrepreneurship in some capacity, even if you pursue the blue-collar route and become a plumber, an electrician, whatever it may be, that's become more of a possibility as corporate structures all across industries are crumbling. So this job has become a much tougher sell than it was when you guys came on in the 2000s. I'll add that point as a feather in my cap as well in terms of getting boots on the ground perspective. And yeah, thank you guys for having me as well.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Bob. Sorry.
I might just add that the corporate structure is becoming decentralized. So a lot of what Jack is saying is that we need to decentralize the police departments as well. Certainly the New York City, because we're talking about the NYPD here, and give the autonomy and the decision-making powers back to the boots on the ground. Okay. So.
Yeah, definitely. I see one comment here. I just have to address this for Rob Lukács. The good news about Chief No Cash, I think that's his nickname now. The good news about the pension for the people who already have pensions, I think you're in good shape for, say, the next 5 or 10 years or so. But when you think about the long-term future of these things, with the city getting ready to declare bankruptcy, perhaps, and them trying to replace the more experienced workers with young, newer people who are less competent and more likely to burn out after a couple years, you can see why the pension system may no longer exist at some point. I'm a huge advocate for pensions. I think if you give your service to the city, you deserve it. But whether we're practically able to give a pension to everyone given the state of the budget, well, that's a question and perhaps a conversation for another day. And there should not be very much reason for optimism behind that.
Jack, that's a tough sell. You know, pensions are like the driving force for cops. And some would say, you know what, that is kind of the amenity you get for facing danger for 20 years or however long you do the job with boots on the ground. You know, Jack, I appreciate it. You know, coming on here and giving your perspective, while some agree or don't agree, it's a great thing to hear. And I think your analysis is great. Can you make an assessment on watching a football game or a baseball game, and yet you were never a professional in that? Yes, you should be allowed to make an analysis and give a fair analysis. This is what it may feel like for someone who's in the game, and here's someone that's watching the game as a spectator and hear my thoughts. So I appreciate it. As always, it's 3 hours and 13 minutes into it. Jack, thank you so much for jumping on. You heard it here. Listen, just shows great balance on this podcast, right, Marlon? We have former cops. We got a former chief No Cash. We have former Inspector Ron Layson who led commands. We got a great apparatus here, great mix of former cops, and having someone that was not a cop, hearing his perspective is quite interesting. While I might not agree on it, but it really opens up our eyes to see, well, what are other young people in their 20s that move around the country, have experience in other jobs? What do they think of law enforcement? So I think this is real community policing. When we talk about community policing, this is part of it. The NYPD, it's an epic fail when they have relationships, these meetings. It's kind of on the surface. These are real conversations. So, Marlon, I appreciate it. Like, share, and subscribe. Marlon, let's get your closing thoughts before we get out of here. And if you could just give us a summation about our topics today.
Yeah. So we talked initially about the conversation that Sal had yesterday with Kelly Grace Price and the excellent article she had yesterday detailing the problems with the NYPD's psychologists, them being unlicensed. We talked about how that in itself is a possible indication of them trying to push a certain agenda through, and how a lot of problems we've seen the last couple of years, including what led us to be the finest unfiltered right now, how they pushed me, Eric, John, and Sal out the door, and how it's all connected to the agenda to remove masculinity from the NYPD, to remove autonomy and decision making from the cops, to automate and to bring in algorithms and AI to be that cheaper police force for the city. And now we talked about one of the other problems that are kind of leading to all of that, which is the loss of manpower and the attrition that goes on in the department. Yeah, these we keep talking about these issues, and we at the Finest Unfiltered have brought up those issues long before they hit the newspaper. And we do it because, as Eric says, we have a deep roster here of multiple viewpoints, and from civilians to feds with our newest show, the 10-4 Tab. And I think we're bringing a lot to the discussion, and I think it would be wise of the job to, they don't like us, but you need to at least take heed of the issues that are going on, because we're telling you what a lot of the boots on the ground can't tell you right now, because they know what's going to happen to their career if they were to publicly say it. So we thank you guys for watching us and being part of the conversation and being part of the community that we've built so far.
Mom, what did Eric Adams, the current mayor, said? He said the bench is deep, right? Well, so the bench is deep also in the Finest Unfiltered family. The only difference is this bench is not going anywhere. We're still in the batter's box, and we're batting 1,000 right now. So, Marlon, as always, you did not become a detective and go to Intel for a phone call. You went because you're damn good. And not only that, he's even better right now. Thank you, everyone, friends and listeners in the chat. Awesome engagement today. I think it's really important that you weigh in. That's what makes this podcast so unique and significant, is your engagement. Community policing. This is community podcasting too. Jack, thanks for jumping on. John, as always, if you're watching or not, I know you good luck to you today with stuff you're taking care of. Be safe in New York. John's out there playing whack-a-mole right now. So, I hope John finds a good place to do his hair too. He's got to take care of that hair. So, as always, thank you, everyone. It's Wednesday, of course. What's going to be on tonight? The Executive Perspective. No Cash will be on again. And, of course, Big Ron Layson. Great cast. They're interviewing someone today. Detectives coming on. I think that's going to be quite interesting. Check them out. And, of course, Thursday again, Sal Greco will be back. If you haven't seen it, the show yesterday was outstanding. I think so far. I think Sal's best show. And Eric Sanders came in as the closer. Great information about what's going on with those psychological, qualified or unqualified licensed therapists, or whatever you want to call them, as far as the hiring process for the NYPD and what goes on the NYPD. Really keep our eye on that. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. Like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back Friday. You know it. John will be back. Roundtable. Marlon will be back. Take care, everybody. Little Kaz Daughtry.
There's a handful of retired officers that don't live in the state that have a lot to say about the dream team, as I like to call it. All of a sudden, they retire and have a master plan on how to fight crime, but nothing to contribute when they were here. They want to come back and be part of the dream team. What can I say?